Prologue. Blood feud. For centuries the world had been torn in two, by fangs and claws, by blood and vengeance. The conflict between werewolves and vampires was not merely a tale whispered around campfires or etched into the dusty scrolls of history. It was a living, breathing nightmare, reawakened with every generation, passed down like a cursed heirloom from parent to child. Werewolves and vampires were sworn enemies, their hatred carved deep into the roots of every ancient forest in the realm of Sintra, and into the very walls of every house that had ever known the loss of blood. They were two forces destined never to coexist. No treaty ever lasted, no truce was ever honored. It was a truth the elders repeated often, a mantra spoken with heavy hearts and clenched jaws. Where one walked, the other brought war. Where one claimed peace, the other sowed chaos. The werewolves of Ashclaw had always stood at the front lines, proud, fierce, and unrelenting in their oath to protect their kind and to eradicate the creatures of the night. Ashclaw was not just a pack, it was a stronghold, a fortress of fur and fang, built on a foundation of loyalty and sacred bloodlines. Its warriors were trained from childhood, molded by tradition and the ever-looming threat of death. It was in the heart of this eternal war that Alpha Leo of Ashclaw was born, a striking boy, even at a young age, with chestnut brown hair like his mother's and piercing hazel eyes that seemed to see straight through lies and shadows. There was something in Leo that spoke of destiny, of storms yet to come. Even as a child, his presence carried weight. He walked with purpose, listened with intent, and never cried, not even when the cold wind of Sintra howled through the night. His mother, Luna Brenda, was the soul of Ashclaw. To the pack, she was not only the alpha's mate, but a beacon of hope. She was beautiful, unearthly so, with long flowing chestnut hair that shimmered like sunlight through autumn leaves, and kind hazel eyes that could silence a brawl with a glance. Her laugh was music, her touch a balm. She was brave beyond measure, willing to place herself between danger and her people without hesitation. Her love was not just for her family, but for every wolf that ran beneath the Ashclaw banner. She was more than a Luna. She was a symbol, a reminder that strength did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered in lullabies and lingered in the warmth of a hearth fire. She was the balance to Alpha Magnus's fury, the voice of reason when bloodlust clouded judgment. And when she walked among her people, they bowed not out of obligation but out of reverence, and she was taken from them. Leo was only 9 when the skies rained with the screams of war. A surprise vampire ambush shattered the sacred peace of the full moon, a night meant for celebration, for unity, for running under the silver light with joy in their hearts. Instead, it became a night of crimson horror. The attack came fast and without warning. Fangs gleamed in the dark, and the wind carried the acrid stench of vampire venom. Amidst the chaos, Brenda fought valiantly. Her wolf was a breathtaking sight, tall, lithe, a blur of chestnut and gold beneath the stars. She did not run from the carnage. She charged headfirst, standing back-to-back with Alpha Magnus, whose enormous gray-black wolf form bared its teeth at the invaders. They fought to protect their son and their pack, their roars shaking the trees. The earth drank deep of blood that night. Brenda's last breath was spent at the border of Ashclaw territory, fangs bared, claws slick with the blood of her enemies. She fell not with fear, but with purpose. She died a warrior, a mother, a Luna. Leo never forgot the sight. Her body lay limp, venom still flowing through her veins. Blood soaked her fur, matting her once lustrous fur. Her eyes, those soft hazel eyes that had once read him bedtime stories and kissed away his nightmares, were frozen in pain. They did not close. They stared at him. The scent of vampire venom still haunted him. He could smell it in his dreams. It clung to his memories like a curse. He was raised from that moment not as a child, but as a warrior. Alpha Magnus, Leo's father, was a towering man carved from stone and battle. His dark chestnut hair was streaked with silver from years of war, his shoulders broad enough to carry the burden of an entire pack. His chest was laced with scars, silent testaments to the many times he had faced death and spat in its face. He was the embodiment of wrath. Where Brenda had loved, Magnus taught vengeance. Grief twisted him, hardened him into something unyielding. His eyes, once filled with warmth for his mate and cub, turned to steel. He buried his pain in drills, in harsh training, in teaching his son the art of survival. He forged Leo with fire. Mornings began with sparring, afternoons with strategy. Leo's bruises became badges of honor. His tears were spent in silence behind clenched teeth. There was no room for softness, not when the world was teeming with monsters waiting to tear out your heart. And Magnus repeated one truth again and again, drilling it into his son's soul until it became part of his blood. Vampires are monsters. They will take everything from you unless you destroy them first. That creed became Leo's truth. He trained with merciless resolve, burying his boyhood grief beneath muscle and discipline. He learned to track by scent alone, to shift in seconds, to fight with tooth and claw and blade. He studied vampire lore, memorizing weaknesses, tactics, feeding patterns. He became a weapon honed by tragedy. And as he grew into the handsome Alpha of Ashclaw, his name became legend. The pack cheered for their leader, a man of justice, of strength, and of hatred. A hatred that burned brightest when he looked toward the north, where the vampire queen ruled from her obsidian throne. He never imagined that his greatest enemy's blood would one day beat in the chest of his fated mate. Welcome back to my channel. This is an audiobook for the Alpha's Forbidden Mate, a tale of werewolves, vampires, love, hatred, betrayal, and redemption set in a world where blood and silver collide. Written and narrated by Cauliflower Campbell. If you're new here, my channel creates stories for adults and teenagers, with lessons and experiences to learn from. We post mainly on Saturdays. Our videos are in different genres and also in different forms. There are full-length audiobooks and short-chaptered audiobooks. Go to my channel page, subscribe, and check out the playlists for more fantasy, romance, thriller, mystery, suspense, and adventure. Prepare yourself for a breathtaking adventure filled with werewolves, vampire mates, forbidden bonds, and a love that defies destiny. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Let the story continue. Chapter 1. The Flame Within. The cold halls of the Castle Vanth echoed with silence, and in that silence Lucy found comfort, not fear. While others might tremble beneath the weight of stillness, she embraced it. It was in silence that she could hear the truth. The distant heartbeat of the world pulsed like a hidden drum, low and patient. Whispers of forgotten stories brushed along the stone walls like the ghosts of her ancestors. She listened to them all, every word a thread in the vast tapestry of her bloodline. She was a daughter of Shadow, and Shadow never frightened her. She stood now before the tall mirror in her chamber, surrounded by the cold glow of moonlight filtering through the arched windows. Her dark, wavy curls cascaded down her back like a curtain of midnight silk, glinting faintly in the pale silver light. Her skin, pale, flawless, and unaging, held the perfect porcelain hue, cool and untouched by time. But it was her eyes that told the truth. Deep crimson, like smoldering coals, always burning with pride and pain. Eyes that had seen more than any girl her age should, though she had long since shed the illusion of girlhood. She was a princess forged in vengeance. Her mother, Queen Selene, had made sure of it. "You must be strong, Lucy," Selene had said often, her voice like the cutting wind of winter. Sharp, cold, beautiful. Werewolves are savages. They tear, they burn, they ruin. Lucy had heard those words all her life, shaped by them like stone beneath the chisel. She had grown up on tales soaked in blood, how vampire infants were torn from their cribs in the dead of night, how peaceful elders were tracked and slaughtered by Ashclaw warriors like animals. The stories weren't stories. They were memories passed down from fangs and fire. The worst was the one about Queen Selene's brother, beloved Uncle Lucian, who once carved lullabies from magic for her crib. She remembered her mother on the night his mangled body was brought home, how the Queen of Death fell to her knees, shaking, as she cradled what remained. That pain had never left Selene, and it had become Lucy's armor. Queen Selene was not just ruler of the vampires, she was their goddess of wrath. ancient and terrible, regal and revered. She was older than the castle's tallest tower, more powerful than 10 of her council combined. Her beauty was unnerving, an eternal winter captured in flesh and elegance. When she entered a room, others bowed not from duty but instinct. Her power commanded it. Her presence devoured doubt, and she loved Lucy, though love in Celine's world was not warm. It was steel, it was discipline. She taught Lucy to read before she could speak, taught her to fight before she could walk, to dance, to deceive, to kill. "You are my legacy," she would whisper into Lucy's hair, brushing a kiss on her brow. "And when the time comes, you must not have mercy. You must conquer." Lucy believed her. She had to, but deep down, hidden like a single rose among thorns, Lucy longed for something more. She wondered sometimes, late at night, when even the moon dared not watch, if there was more to life than blood and conquest. More than endless lessons in war, court politics, and the ritual slaughter of enemies. She would stare out the tower window at the forests far below, watching the shadows dance under starlight, and dream. Could there be peace? Could there be something else? But dreams did not last long in Castle Vantha, not when the war drums beat, and now they thundered louder than ever. Ashclaw wolves had struck again, swift and brutal. Another vampire outpost in the eastern woods had fallen. The scouts who returned were trembling wrecks, eyes wild with horror, speaking of flames and howls and death without mercy. Lucy did not hesitate. There was no time for poetry or doubt. She stepped away from the mirror, her crimson eyes hardening into steel. She dressed in silence, sliding on her obsidian daggers, handcrafted from the blackened bones of ancient beasts. Her armor was light but lethal, a sleek bodice and cloak designed for stealth and slaughter. Every thread had been enchanted, every buckle whispered vengeance. Outside, the queen's personal guard awaited, 10 of the fiercest vampires in the realm, mounted on dark steeds that exhaled mist with every breath. Lucy mounted her mare with the grace of a dancer and the purpose of a soldier. She would ride into the heart of darkness. She would find the wolves who dared touch her kin. She would spill werewolf blood. And she would prove she was no longer just Celine's daughter. She was her flame, her sword, her vengeance. She was the fire of the Castle Vantha. What Lucy did not know, what even her mother's foresight could not divine, was that destiny had already taken root in the soil of this war, that her path was not as straight as it seemed. For through the trees, in the shadows between branches, something watched her ride. Fate had teeth, and it was hunting too. Chapter 2. Blood in the Moonlight. The sky roared like a beast unchained, clouds shredding apart to reveal the haunting brilliance of the full moon. Its cold light bathed the land in silver fire, as if blessing the violence erupting below. The ground trembled beneath the fury of battle. Claws tore through armor. Fangs sank deep into flesh. Screams echoed through the trees of Broken Fang Ridge, deep within the cursed heart of Black Hollow Forest in Sintra. There was no diplomacy here, no speeches or negotiations, only the oldest language, the song of bloodshed, hatred, and war. Alpha Leo of Ashclaw stood at the front lines like a god of war made flesh. Towering, broad-shouldered, and seething with lethal intent, he moved like a storm incarnate. His chestnut hair whipped in the wind, wild and untamed, and his hazel eyes, touched by alpha fury, gleamed like molten gold. Muscles coiled and surged beneath battle-worn armor, each movement as precise as a predator's strike. In his hand, his blade, silver forged and engraved with runes of the first howl, sliced through vampires like they were made of mist. He was the son of a slain Luna, a boy born in the ashes of grief, a man raised by fire and vengeance. Tonight his blade would sing for his mother. This wasn't just another skirmish, this was personal. Ashclaw's forces howled their defiance into the sky as they drove their enemies back, the sound echoing through the hollows like a death knell. Every claw swipe was a declaration, every howl a promise. Leo's voice rose above them all, a rallying cry so deep and guttural it shook even the bravest warriors on both sides. But then, through the chaos, through the war cries and clashing steel, he saw her, a blur of darkness and elegance, weaving through the blood-soaked battlefield like a phantom. Her movements were poetry in motion, lethal and beautiful. Long black curls flowed behind her like a banner of midnight. Her figure was draped in assassin's black, armor kissed with crimson. She was surrounded by death, and untouched by it, and her eyes, crimson. Twin flames in the night. Leo's breath caught, even mid-strike. Something primal stirred within him, something ancient and forbidden. She cut down one of his wolves, Cain, a seasoned warrior, and spun away without a second glance. Her obsidian daggers gleamed with silver venom, coated in deadly enchantments that hissed with every drop spilled. Her fangs gleamed in the moonlight, her gaze locked with his. Time stopped. For a single breath. Hatred surged between them like lightning about to strike. A pull, a push. Recognition in a soul-deep place neither of them understood yet. Leo growled low in his throat, the sound more wolf than man. The vampire, Lucy, smirked, her lips curling with defiance. Their first conversation wasn't with words. It was with fury. It was a challenge screamed across a battlefield written in blood. They knew what the other was, what the other represented. Fated enemies. He charged, his blade glinting with righteous fury. She darted to meet him, faster than any human eye could track, daggers poised to pierce his heart. But fate intervened with a howl, a deep, thunderous sound that rolled through the forest like a god's growl. The Ashclaw reinforcements had arrived, an entire battalion of elite wolves, fangs bared, eyes glowing, claws dripping with anticipation. They surged onto the battlefield like an avalanche, tearing into the flanks of the vampire line. The vampires faltered, their formation crumbling. Screams rang out, commands snapped in panic. Queen Celine's soldiers were not cowards, but even they knew when the tide turned. Retreat. Lucy's snarl of frustration cut through the din as a soldier vampire grabbed her arm, pulling her back. Her eyes, wild and livid, locked with Leo's once more. He didn't chase her. Not yet. He stood still, panting, blood dripping from his blade and arms, watching as she vanished into the shadows. Her scent lingered, blood, smoke, and something darker, richer, something intoxicating. "She's mine," he whispered, the words tumbling from his lips like a vow, tasting of iron and destiny. He didn't yet understand why those words burned on his tongue like a prayer. But he would, soon, for the moon had chosen its players, and their story had only just begun. Chapter 3. Shadows and Poisoned Words. The obsidian towers of Castle Vanth loomed above the dark horizon, piercing the night sky like the jagged fangs of ancient beasts. Black clouds coiled around their peaks, swirling like angry phantoms, and the wind howled with the voices of long-dead kings. The castle itself, carved into the spine of the Black Mountains, pulsed with the cold lifeblood of vampire royalty, eternal, unyielding, and merciless. Even the stars seemed to keep their distance, as if the heavens themselves feared what stirred inside those darkened halls. Through the fortress gates, Lucy stormed, her footsteps echoing like war drums down the long, polished obsidian corridors. Her black leather armor clung to her like a second skin, splattered with blood, ash, and fury. The scent of war still clung to her like perfume, smoke, silver, and scorched magic. Her crimson eyes blazed with lingering rage, glowing with the aftermath of battle. She had yet to sheath her obsidian daggers, their poisoned edges still slick from the battlefield. There was no time, no breath, no pause for reflection. The throne hall loomed ahead, vast and foreboding. Its Gothic arches curved like talons into the high ceiling, lit by the soft, eerie glow of crimson-tinted flame sconces. The air was thick with power and expectation. Shadows danced along the polished black floors, silent observers of the legacy unfolding within these walls. At the far end, seated upon a throne carved of dark stone and veined with blood-red crystal, sat Queen Celine, a vision of ancient power. The queen of the Castle Vantha. Her beauty was cruel and eternal, the kind that made lesser creatures weep and tremble. Skin pale as winter moonlight, hair dark as void. Her lips, stained with wine and war, curved into neither smile nor scowl, but something far colder. Her crimson eyes were endless, like bottomless wells of night and memory, and they narrowed the moment Lucy entered. Standing beside her, like a loyal hound cloaked in arrogance, was General Klaus. He was everything Lucy loathed. A warrior born not from purpose but politics, his silver tongue more dangerous than any blade. Tall, with chiseled features that could charm or condemn, he wore his black cloak like royalty, the red gemstone clasps gleaming like droplets of blood. His crimson eyes were sharp, calculating, always watching, always judging. He gave a mocking bow as she approached. "Back so soon, princess?" Klaus asked, voice smooth as poison silk. His words slithered like serpents, subtle and condescending. "I had hoped you would return with the Ashclaw Alpha's head, or perhaps at least an arm." Lucy clenched her jaw, fists tightening at her sides. The taste of smoke and battle still coated her tongue. "We were outnumbered," she said, voice cold and unwavering. "Ashclaw reinforcements arrived. Had I stayed, we would have lost half our men." Klaus gave a theatrical sigh, turning to the Queen as though addressing a court. "Ah, always the strategist, always the retreat. But excuses, my dear, do not win wars. Courage does, strength, sacrifice. You should have held your ground, proved your worth." Lucy's fangs lengthened slightly, lips curling in disgust. But before she could speak, Queen Selene raised a single hand. The room froze. Her voice, when it came, was soft, but laced with frost. Enough. The shadows themselves seemed to still. Even Klaus's smirk faltered under the Queen's gaze. Her eyes flicked from Klaus to Lucy, unreadable yet dangerous. "I grow weary of your bickering," she said, each word precise and razor-edged. "Leave me." Klaus bowed stiffly, his smirk returning only once he turned away. Lucy, jaw clenched, gave a sharp nod and turned on her heel. But as Klaus passed her, he leaned close, just enough to let his venom drip into her ear. "You're still not ready to lead, little princess." She didn't flinch, didn't speak, but inside the fire roared. Let him speak, let him mock. She would show him, show them all, not with words, not with titles, but with fire and blood. She stalked through the stone halls, past the towering stained glass windows that told centuries of vampire glory, her mind spinning. Her pulse still thrummed with the memory of battle, the scent of blood, the clash of steel, the heat of his eyes. Alpha Leo. The thought struck her like a blade. His image lingered in her mind, unwanted yet relentless. His golden hazel eyes burning with hatred and something else, something that shook her to her core. No. She couldn't afford such thoughts. He was her enemy. Her mother's enemy. Her people's curse. But even as she tried to dismiss him, his voice haunted her. The way he had looked at her, not with fear but recognition. The way their souls had collided like storm clouds ready to burst. She gritted her teeth and climbed the tower stairs to her chamber, needing the solitude of the sky. Outside her window, the night stretched infinite, dark, endless, cruel. The stars whispered forgotten truths, and the moon cast her pale light on the mountain peaks. Lucy placed her daggers on the windowsill, the silver venom still hissing softly. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't think of conquest or glory. She thought of him, and that terrified her more than any war. For what was worse than facing your enemy on the battlefield? Wanting him. Chapter 4. A pawn returned. The air in Castlevantha hung heavy with unease, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Shadows twisted in the corners of the great halls, whispering rumors to one another with curling fingers of smoke and flickering candlelight. Even the chandeliers seemed to burn dimmer, casting fractured reflections across the black marble floors. Castlevantha was always a place of fear and power, but tonight something deeper stirred, an invisible tension that seemed to watch Lucy's every step. She hadn't seen her mother since the terse dismissal in the throne hall. Queen Selene's disappointment had settled like frost in her bones, and the silence that followed was more punishing than any shout. Lucy spent her day pacing the edges of the night terrace, the vast balcony that jutted from the side of the castle and overlooked the endless expanse of Sintra. From there she could see the ghostly silhouettes of mountains and feel the cold wind tug at her cloak, as though trying to carry her far from everything she had ever known. but no wind could lift the weight that pressed on her shoulders. She leaned on the black stone rail, staring into the abyss, the memory of Alpha Leo refusing to fade. She could still see him, his hazel eyes burning with fury and something unspoken, his powerful form cloaked in blood and command. She hated how vividly he stayed in her thoughts, hated that even the scent of the wind seemed to carry the memory of him. He was a werewolf, her enemy, a symbol of everything she was raised to destroy. And yet, the thoughts tangled like vines around her heart. As twilight bled into night, a messenger in blood-red robes arrived, his face pale and tight with nerves. "The Queen summons you to her chambers." Immediately, Lucy didn't hesitate. She turned, heart heavy with foreboding, and made her way through the winding corridors. Each step echoed in the empty halls, a drumbeat to whatever judgment awaited her. Queen Celine's chamber was dark as ever, perfumed heavily with burning myrrh and moon-pressed oils. The curtains of black velvet shifted gently in the breeze, and the fire crackled in the hearth like a creature with secrets to tell. Her mother stood near the fire, tall and regal in a gown of shadow-threaded silk. Her pale hands were clasped before her, her face unreadable. But Lucy's eyes didn't linger on the Queen. They landed on General Klaus. He stood at Celine's side, like a shadow that would not die, his arms folded across his chest, crimson eyes gleaming with quiet victory. There was something smug in his posture, something smugger in the silence that followed. "I've considered the matter," Queen Celine said without preamble, her voice as crisp as ice breaking over still water. "You will return to the battlefield." Lucy's crimson eyes narrowed, glowing faintly. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. The pieces snapped together instantly. Her suspicion ignited like flint and tinder. She turned to Klaus, expression steel. "You're sending me back?" Klaus stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back with false humility, the way a man might approach a trap he'd baited. "Our enemies will not wait for us to mourn pride. You know the terrain, the rhythm of Ashclaw's advance. It only makes sense that you lead." Queen Celine gave the barest nod. He is right. It was a command wrapped in justification. Lucy's jaw tensed, but she said nothing. She already knew what this was. It was a test, or worse, a quiet execution. Klaus wanted her gone, not victorious. He wanted her humiliated or dead, her position weakened, her influence stripped. Still, she bowed her head with controlled grace. "Yes, my queen." Klaus's lips curved into a fox's grin. "Your second fleet is ready, hand-picked for you." She didn't need to ask who had done the picking. She already knew. They would be fledglings, barely blooded, strong in loyalty perhaps, but green as spring leaves, not soldiers, pawns. But she would make them into something more. Let them send her into the jaws of war. Let them sharpen her chains and call it duty. She would forge herself into a weapon so precise they'd regret ever doubting her. She met Klaus's eyes and said evenly, "I'll lead them, and I'll return victorious." Queen Celine nodded again, her gaze briefly softening, or perhaps it only seemed so in the flickering firelight. "Do not fail me, Lucy." Lucy bowed once more, this time with the full dignity of her bloodline. "I will not." She turned and left the chamber, her boots echoing down the corridor like a war drum of her own. Behind her, Klaus's voice slipped through the shadows like a dagger in the dark. "Try not to disappoint us again, little princess." She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The fire in her blood spoke louder than his venom ever could. She was not a pawn. She was the reckoning. And if fate dared to throw Alpha Leo in her path again, then let it. She would meet him with fire. And this time, she wouldn't look away. Not until one of them fell. Not until the stars themselves wept red. Chapter 5. The Trap. The night was thick with fog when Lucy's second fleet marched toward the borderlands at Broken Fang Ridge. The trees stood silent like sentinels of memory, and the wind curled through the forest like a ghost, unnatural and whispering of doom. The world felt wrong, too quiet, too still. Still, Lucy rode at the front of the line with her head held high, her obsidian armor gleaming faintly in the moonlight. The warriors behind her, green, inexperienced, their gazes flickering nervously to the shadows, were hardly more than children dressed in war paint. She knew this was a death mission, a cruel game set in motion by Klaus, a trap wrapped in duty. But her pride burned brighter than her fear. She would not falter. The closer they came to the ridge, the more her senses tingled. Her instincts screamed. The trees leaned inward as if to warn her, yet she said nothing. Showing fear would only rattle the fragile courage of her soldiers. And so, with jaw clenched and crimson eyes sharpened, she pressed forward. They stepped into the ancient clearing of Broken Fang Ridge, a place soaked in the blood of generations. The fog thickened, curling between roots and armor, swallowing sound. And then, in the breath between heartbeats, the sky rained death. Arrows whistled down like a storm, silver-tipped and unforgiving. Screams erupted around her as vampires fell, some pierced through the heart, others through the throat. The scent of burning flesh filled the air where silver met immortal skin. "Ambush!" Lucy roared, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. But it was too late. From the swirling mist came shadows, fast and feral, werewolves cloaked in ash and fury, and at their center, like a beast carved from prophecy, came Alpha Leo. He emerged like a dark god from myth, tall, powerful, his hazel eyes glowing gold with alpha rage. His hair was tousled by the wind, his stance sure and dangerous. His warriors followed him with savage discipline, flanking Lucy's panicked fleet on all sides. Lucy lifted her hand, summoning a pulse of raw, burning energy, ready to unleash her wrath, but a blur of movement struck her first. She was disarmed in an instant, a blur of glowing iron wrapping around her wrists. The cuffs burned on contact, biting into her flesh, suppressing her power. Her soldiers tried to rally, but they were hopelessly outmatched. One by one, they were seized and shackled, dropped like petals in a storm. Not killed, captured. Leo stood before her now, his gaze unreadable. The battlefield around them had fallen silent, save for the groans of the wounded and the crackle of fire where arrows had ignited the underbrush. Lucy spat at his feet, fangs bared, her crimson eyes blazing. "Coward," she hissed. Leo didn't flinch. "You walked into a war unprepared," he replied, his voice cold as iron. "That's not bravery, that's arrogance." He turned to one of the captured vampires, a silver-haired boy named Vasily, barely old enough to hold a blade, and pointed. "Go, run to your queen. Tell her what happened here. Tell her I've taken her daughter." The boy hesitated, eyes wide with fear, but Lucy gave him a single sharp nod, disappearing into the woods like a ghost. Lucy stared up at Leo with all the fury of her bloodline burning in her eyes. "You'll regret this." Leo's expression didn't change. "We'll see." And without another word, he stepped forward, gripped her bound form like she was nothing but a fallen banner, and threw her over his shoulder. She screamed, she thrashed, she kicked with all the fury she could summon. But the iron burned and the fog swallowed her rage. He carried her deeper into enemy land, into the heart of the Ashclaw fortress, into a cage, into fate. Chapter 6. Chains and Fire. The Ashclaw fortress was carved into the jagged cliffs of the northern reaches, where the sky was always gray and the sun dared not linger. Its stone walls, thick and ancient, bore the scars of countless battles. The structure loomed like a creature asleep, its towers sharp and unyielding, soaked in the blood and legacy of werewolf history. It was not a place of comfort, it was a monument to survival, cold, brutal, unforgiving, just like the wolves who called it home. Lucy had never seen such a place before. Dragged through the arched gate under heavy guard, her boots scraped against the rough stone floor, echoing in rhythm with the beat of her defiance. Her black leather armor was gone, stripped from her body after capture. Her battle dress, once regal, now hung in torn ribbons muddied with blood and dirt. Her long dark hair fell in tangled waves down her back, and though her wrists were raw from the iron cuffs biting into her flesh, she kept her head held high. Proud, unyielding. The Ashclaw wolves sneered as she passed. Some growled low in their throats, the guttural sound vibrating through the corridors. Yet not one of them dared to touch her. Because Alpha Leo had spoken, "No one touches the prisoner," the words had not been loud, but they'd carried weight, enough to still even the boldest among them. They led her through narrow corridors and spiraling stairwells, down into the heart of the fortress. Past war rooms filled with ancient maps, past training grounds that smelled of sweat and steel, until they reached the dungeon level, deep beneath the earth. There, they opened a reinforced iron door, groaning on rusted hinges. The cell they threw her into was cold and dark, lit only by a single torch flickering on the damp stone wall. Runes etched in old blood glowed faintly across the bars. Enchanted, laced with silver and wards that dulled her strength, quieted her mind. Still, Lucy didn't cry. She didn't beg, she waited. Hours passed, maybe more. Time meant nothing in this place. She sat silently on the stone slab that served as her bed, staring at the flame as it danced. Memories of the ambush replayed in her mind, Vasily running, her warriors falling, Klaus's smug smile before the mission. Her mother's silence. Her blood boiled, and yet she remained still, coiled like a blade in the dark. Then, at last, the door creaked open. Alpha Leo entered. He didn't come with a guard, he didn't come armed, but his presence filled the cell like thunder. Dressed in a dark tunic, rain still glistening on his broad shoulders, he looked every inch the warrior prince of the wolves. His chestnut hair was tousled, his jaw set like carved stone, and his hazel eyes, no, gold now, rimmed with fire, locked onto her with something unreadable. Lucy rose slowly, eyes glowing red. "Come to gloat, Alpha?" she asked, voice like silk over steel. He didn't answer immediately, he just stared, studied her like she was some puzzle the gods had cursed him with. "You should be dead," he said finally. "So should you," she shot back. Silence stretched between them, thick, charged, like lightning waiting to strike. "You hate me," she continued softly. "Because of what I am." His jaw flexed. "I hate everything you are, a vampire, a weapon in Celine's war. Your kind butchered my mother before my father's eyes. I was 6... Lucy stepped closer, her crimson eyes never leaving his. "And your kind torched every coven between here and the border. Tell me, Alpha, how many vampire children burned under your father's orders?" Leo didn't move, didn't blink, but a muscle ticked in his jaw. "They were fire and storm, oil and spark, neither backing down. I could kill you right now," he said quietly, "and my people would sing for 100 years. Lucy's smirk was slow, dangerous. "But you won't, because you have honor. Or is it curiosity?" He stepped closer, and for a heartbeat their bodies nearly touched through the bars. His gaze dropped to her lips, then snapped back to her eyes. "You'll be treated like a prisoner of war. No better, no worse," he growled. She tilted her head, amusement flickering in her eyes. "How noble." Leo's eyes darkened. "But make no mistake. If you try anything, I'll end you. No hesitation." Lucy's voice dropped to a whisper. "Try what? Tempt you? Scare you? Or make you feel something you don't want to?" His nostrils flared. For a moment the alpha mask cracked. Something wild and confused flared in his eyes, then vanished. Without another word he turned sharply and stormed out. The door slammed behind him, the echo a harsh punctuation in the silence. Lucy exhaled slowly and sat back down. She stared at the flickering torch again, her thoughts no longer on Klaus or even her mother. Not entirely, because something had shifted in that cell. Not peace, not surrender, but something more dangerous. A war of hearts neither of them was prepared to lose. Chapter 7. Silence and Shadows. The great obsidian towers of Castle Vanth trembled with fury as Queen Celine stood at the heart of her throne chamber, her scarlet robes trailing behind her like liquid blood. The scent of burning myrrh hung thick in the air, mingling with the bitter tang of rage. Vasily, the young vampire scout, knelt before her on shaking knees, his voice quivering as he delivered the message that would chill even the immortal heart of the queen. Lucy was captured, taken by Alpha Leo. The second fleet had lost. A silence followed, vast and suffocating. The court froze in collective breath, no one daring to move. Even the flames in the black iron braziers flickered erratically, as if caught in the storm of the queen's rising fury. Her crimson eyes glowed with an intensity that fractured the shadows around her. She did not speak. Not yet. Her fangs extended slightly as her lips pressed into a hard, deadly line. The steel in her silence screamed louder than any outburst. But then, stepping forward with the patience of a seasoned serpent, came General Klaus. "My queen," he said smoothly, lowering into a bow that was more strategy than reverence. "We must not act rashly." Celine turned her gaze upon him, slow and cutting. "He has my daughter." Klaus did not flinch. Instead, he lifted his head with careful grace, his hair catching the firelight. "Yes. But Leo is not his father. He is a creature of discipline and control. He values honor above bloodlust. If we attack without thought, if we unleash vengeance now, Lucy may suffer needlessly." The words cut through the fury. Celine clenched her fists, her nails drawing blood from her own palms. She hated Klaus, hated how logical he could be when all she wanted was fire and ash. Still, she listened. "What do you suggest?" she asked coldly. Klaus straightened, voice smooth as ever. "We wait. We let him wonder. Lucy will not break, and he will not harm her. Not yet." Silence once more. Then Celine turned her back to the court, her voice sharp as winter blades. "Send no message." A murmur of confusion rippled through the nobles. Celine raised her hand. "Let him wonder what we're planning." Far away, days later, in the deep cold of the Ashclaw dungeons, the air was thicker than ever. Moisture dripped from the stone ceiling like the blood of forgotten gods. The silver wards etched into the stone walls pulsed faintly with a dim, cruel light. Lucy sat curled in the farthest corner of her cell, her once fiery crimson eyes dulled with exhaustion, heavy with a fury that had no outlet. Her long hair clung to her skin, damp and tangled. The ragged remnants of her dress clung to her like cobwebs, her skin marked with bruises and iron burns. She didn't speak. She didn't scream. She waited. Then the door creaked open. Again, she didn't look up. Alpha Leo entered the dungeon. His steps were slow this time, deliberate. The guards did not follow. He came alone, as he had each day since her capture. He stood just outside her cell, arms crossed over his chest. His tunic was simple, his presence anything but. Rain had soaked his hair again, droplets trailing down his cheek. His hazel eyes were darker tonight, rimmed with fatigue. "You've been here for days," he said finally. Lucy did not move. "No envoy has come, no message, nothing." Still, she gave no response. He stepped closer, voice dropping. "Maybe your mother doesn't care." That did it. Her head snapped up, her crimson eyes blazing with sudden fire. "Don't," she spat. "You don't know her." Leo didn't flinch. He held her gaze. "I know she sent you to die, and I know she hasn't moved a finger to get you back. That's not care, that's abandonment." Lucy laughed bitterly. It was a sharp sound, full of venom and pain. "And your kind is so loyal?" Leo's brows furrowed. "I never said we were better." For a moment, there was something else in the silence. Something older, a grief that lived in both their bones. He reached down and slid a tray of food through the bars. It was simple: bread, meat, a flask of rabbit blood, but warm, fresh. "Eat," he said quietly. "You're no good to anyone dead." Lucy didn't touch it. She stared at the tray, then at him. "Trying to keep your prisoner alive for war games, Alpha?" He shook his head. "No." "Trying to figure out why it doesn't feel right, seeing you like this." He didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked away, his boots echoing against the stone floor, each step fading into shadow. Lucy watched him go. Her chest burned, but not from rage, from something far more dangerous. And she knew now, with aching certainty, that chains weren't the only thing binding her in this place. It was him. Chapter 8. Whispers of Betrayal. The cold winds that swept through Ashclaw Fortress carried more than just the bite of winter. They carried whispers, silent and sharp as blades, slicing through the air with secrets no one dared speak aloud. Rumors had begun to stir, birthed in the shadowy corners of stone corridors and carried from soldier to soldier like a forbidden fire. It started subtly, as such dangerous things always do. The guards who patrolled the dungeon noticed the changes first. They noted how Alpha Leo lingered longer near the vampire princess's cell, how the once sharp barks of orders to reinforce her restraints were replaced with quiet visits. The tension that once hardened his shoulders began to shift into something more elusive, something none of them could name. He brought her food. He watched her in silence, and though she remained behind enchanted iron, there was something unsettling in the stillness between them. At first the guards said nothing. He was their alpha, after all. But wolves were creatures of instinct, and their instincts were beginning to churn. By the third visit, the unease had grown thick enough to call attention. Beta Harlan, Leo's most trusted second-in-command, stood like a stone sentinel outside the dungeon gates. His arms were folded across his chest, his sharp eyes fixed on Leo as he emerged from the shadows within. "She's our enemy," Harlan said without preamble, his voice low but hard. "You're visiting her too often." Leo's jaw tightened. "I don't need permission to check on my prisoner." "She's not just any prisoner," Harlan said. "I know exactly who she is." Leo snapped. There was silence then, heavy with unsaid thoughts. Finally, Harlan leaned in slightly, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Does your father?" That question, so softly spoken, landed like a strike. Alpha Magnus, the Iron Wolf of the North, was not a man easily misled. Tall and built like a glacier with scars etched across his forearms and a perpetual grimness around his mouth, he had ruled Ashclaw with strength and unforgiving discipline, and he had begun to notice. During the next war council, Magnus watched Leo with the shrewd eyes of a seasoned predator. The alpha heir spoke little. His mind was elsewhere, too still, too quiet. After the council dissolved into murmurs of supply routes and flanking strategies, Magnus caught his son in the corridor, far from listening ears. The flickering torchlight painted them in shadow. "Why do I smell vampire on you?" Magnus asked, voice sharp and unforgiving. Leo turned slowly, his face expressionless. "The only vampire here is in the dungeon. That scent is expected." Magnus's eyes narrowed. "No, it's not just expected, it's lingering. Too often. You reek of hesitation." Leo didn't flinch. "I've been observing her, interrogating." "You're sympathizing," Magnus snarled. "She's the daughter of the creature who slaughtered your mother on the battlefield. Have you forgotten what they did to her, to us?" Leo's hands clenched into fists. "I haven't forgotten a damn thing." "Then act like it," Magnus growled, stepping closer. His presence was overwhelming, forged from years of bloodshed. "If your feelings cloud your duty, Leo, you are no alpha of mine." Leo met his father's glare with defiance, but behind his eyes, doubt brewed like a storm. Meanwhile, the whispers among the pack grew louder. "The alpha's changing. He talks to her like she's not the enemy. He brings her food, sits in silence, watches her. And then, the most dangerous whisper of all, what if she's his mate?" That final rumor, though hushed, struck like lightning through the heart of Ashclaw. The bond of mates was sacred, an unbreakable tie forged by the moon itself. If it were true, if Leo was bound by fate to a vampire, then everything they stood for was in peril. To love a vampire was betrayal, to be mated to one was treason of blood. The wolves of Ashclaw were many things, feral, proud, war-forged, but above all they were loyal, and now that loyalty was being tested. Because if their alpha's heart beat for the enemy, then whose side was he truly on? Chapter 9. The Crimson Line. The cold courtyard of Ashclaw Fortress echoed with boots and bloodlust. Snow drifted in lazy, ghost-like spirals from the iron sky, covering the stone with a soft white blanket that would soon be stained red. Alpha Magnus, towering and fearsome in his black war leathers, stood at the heart of the square. He was the embodiment of vengeance, his presence a cold knife through the soul of anyone who dared defy him. Around him, warriors of Ashclaw gathered, their breath rising in clouds, their howls subdued but ready. Before them stood a line of bound vampires, the prisoners captured alongside Lucy during the ambush at Broken Fang Ridge. Their wrists were shackled in glowing silver cuffs that sapped their strength, their skin burned with welts or metal-touched flesh. Yet despite their bruises and chains, they stood proud, heads high, eyes forward. They were warriors of Castle Vanthe, and even in chains, they bore their legacy. Lucy was dragged out last. Her war dress hung in tatters, torn and bloodied from days of confinement. Her long dark hair fell around her face in a wild mess, her crimson eyes flicking with fury. She stumbled once on the icy stones but caught herself and raised her chin. She didn't need to speak to make her defiance known. 2 guards flanked her roughly, forcing her forward. The snow crunched beneath her boots as she was shoved to her knees before the execution line. Magnus turned toward the crowd, his voice thundering across the courtyard. "She watches this," he declared, pointing toward Lucy without looking. "Let her see how we treat her kind. Let her learn that her kind, those who butchered my Luna, your beloved Luna Brenda and mother of your Alpha Leo, will never walk free under our sky." A chorus of howls erupted from the crowd. Claws extended, fangs gleamed. The bloodlust rippled through the wolves like lightning through a storm cloud. Lucy's heart pounded as she stared at her warriors. Vagor, Corin, Delphine. Each one of them had fought beside her, followed her orders, believed in her mission. Now they would die for it, and she would watch. At the edge of the platform stood Leo, silent, still, wrapped in shadows as if carved from stone. He hadn't agreed to this. He hadn't known. His mouth was a hard line, his hands tight at his sides. Every fiber of him screamed to move, to speak, to stop what was happening. But duty warred with something deeper. When Magnus raised his hand, the executioners stepped forward. They were masked, cloaked in red, bearing silver blades and oak daggers, the twin deaths of vampire kind. Lucy surged forward despite the guards gripping her arms. "Cowards!" she screamed. "They fought with honor! They didn't beg! They fought!" Her voice cracked the silence like thunder. But Magnus gave the signal. The first dagger sank into Vagor's chest. He fell with a gasp, his silver hair darkened with blood. The snow beneath him bloomed crimson. Lucy's scream tore the sky. Then came the second. The third. One by one, her soldiers were executed before her, each death more brutal than the last. Leo turned his face, jaw clenched so tightly it ached. The sounds, the gasps, the gurgling cries, the silence that followed, would haunt him forever. He saw the joy in some of his warriors' eyes, saw their triumph. And for the first time, he questioned everything. He looked back at Lucy. She had gone silent. Her tears froze on her cheeks, but her eyes burned hotter than the sun. And he saw her, truly saw her. Not as a vampire, not as the enemy, but as a leader, a daughter, a fighter. And in her grief, she looked so much like himself that it shattered something inside him. That night, Leo stood alone atop the battlements, wind whipping through his hair. The moon stared down in cold indifference. Below, the blood from the courtyard had not yet faded from the stone and snow. He could still hear Lucy's cries. He could still see Magnus's satisfied sneer. The screams had long faded, but Lucy's silence echoed louder than any of them. His heart, torn between loyalty and something darker, deeper, refused to settle. He gripped the stone wall until his knuckles turned white, because now he understood. They weren't just at war with vampires, they were at war with themselves, and the line between monster and man had never looked so thin. The crimson line had been crossed, and there was no going back. Chapter 10. A glimpse of her. The news traveled fast, carried not by ravens or written letters, but by shadows and whispers. In the great halls of Castle Vanth, high atop the obsidian towers, Queen Selene stood amidst a storm of rage. When word reached her that the Ashclaw pack had executed her daughter's warriors, slain them mercilessly, one by one, before Lucy's very eyes, Selene's fury became legend. The skies above her darkened, the clouds swirling with unnatural force, thunder shaking the mountain spires. Her very voice echoed like a curse. "They executed my warriors before my daughter's eyes?" She seethed, pacing the floor of black marble, her hands alive with crackling dark energy. "And still she breathes among them? What games is Alpha Leo playing with my blood?" The royal court held their breath. None dared to speak until General Klaus, ever composed in his silver-threaded armor, stepped forward. His voice was both silk and steel. "We must not show our hand too soon, my queen," he said with a respectful bow. "Send an envoy first. Confirm the truth. Let us know her condition. If they've harmed her, we raze their lands to ash and salt the ground beneath." Celine's lips drew into a thin line. Her gaze was a blade, cold and decisive. With a single nod, she summoned her fastest vampires, whisper swift and unseen, bound for Ashclaw. Meanwhile, in the stone-buried heart of Ashclaw Fortress, Alpha Leo stood still before the heavy doors of the dungeon. The stone beneath his boots felt colder than ever. The vampires from Celine's court had arrived hours ago, cloaked in shadows, bearing no weapons, only words. They had come demanding proof that Princess Lucy lived and was unharmed. Leo had expected her mother to come sooner, but the delay had been a language of its own, a cruel silence, a test. Now, the moment had come. He couldn't present Lucy like this, not in rags and chains, not like a defeated animal. The thought of it made something primal in his chest recoil. She was proud, regal. She deserved more, even if she was his prisoner. Without a word, Leo descended into the depths. The scent of damp stone and old magic clung to the air. Torches flickered as he approached her cell. Lucy lay curled in the shadows, her war dress now nothing but torn fabric, her skin marked with grief and exhaustion. Her crimson eyes burned with a fire that had not died. He unlocked the door. The metal groaned, but she did not move. "You're coming with me," he said quietly. She flinched at his voice, but rose without a word. The guards watched in silence as he escorted her, without chains, without bindings, upward through the winding halls. But instead of leading her to the throne room or a public gallery, he took her somewhere else. To his own quarters. The Alpha's chamber was warmer than the rest of the fortress. A hearth burned softly in the corner, casting gold and amber hues across stone and wood. A bearskin rug sprawled across the floor. The scent of pine, leather, lingered in the air. A young maid, Una, stood waiting. Her eyes widened at the sight of Lucy, but she did not falter. Leo turned to her. "Clean her. Give her something fresh to wear. And—" He hesitated, his eyes trailing to Lucy's tangled curls. "Braid her hair." The maid curtsied and nodded. Leo stepped back, his gaze lingering on Lucy for a heartbeat longer than he intended. Then he left the room. Lucy stood in stunned silence for a moment, the warmth of the fire a sharp contrast to the dungeon chill still clinging to her skin. Una approached her slowly, kindly. "Come, princess," she said softly. "Let's get you clean." Lucy didn't want to accept kindness, not from this place, but something in Una's gentle tone melted her resistance. The bath was already drawn, steaming with lavender oil, rose petals drifting on the surface like forgotten dreams. As Lucy slid into the warmth, her body sagged with a quiet, involuntary sigh. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let herself forget. Una worked in silence. She washed the blood and dirt from Lucy's skin, combed out the tangles in her long black hair, and rinsed it with rose water. Then she dried her gently, like a sister, and dressed her in a soft, ash-gray gown that clung to her like smoke. Lastly, Una braided Lucy's hair with thin silver ribbons, weaving the strands into a crown-like coil. When Leo returned, he paused in the doorway. The chamber was quiet. The fire crackled softly. The scent of roses lingered like memory. Lucy sat at the edge of his bed, turned toward the window where moonlight spilled in like silk. Her silhouette was otherworldly, pale and perfect, shadowed and strong. Her crimson eyes, once filled with fire, now shimmered with unshed tears. He didn't speak. He didn't dare. He simply stood and looked. She hadn't heard him enter, or perhaps she had but chose not to acknowledge him. But after a long moment she spoke. "Did she send for me?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Leo swallowed. The truth clung to the back of his throat like smoke. "Yes," he said. "She did." Lucy nodded once, her gaze never leaving the moonlit horizon. But he could see the storm inside her, hope and betrayal warring behind those crimson eyes. He had never seen anyone look so strong and yet so wounded, and as he watched her in that fragile silence, something shifted deep within him. A part of him he thought long dead stirred. His wolf, ever guarded, ever fierce, now growled not in warning, but in longing. Leo clenched his jaw, turned, and left the room, because he wasn't supposed to feel this. But he did. Chapter 11. Masks Before the Moon. The heavy iron gates of Ashclaw Fortress creaked open at dawn, groaning with the weight of age and omen. A hush fell over the pack as Queen Celine's envoys stepped through the ancient archway, cloaked in robes of obsidian silk that shimmered like a raven's wings beneath the pale morning sun. Silver-threaded embroidery wove ancient vampire runes into their hems, glinting faintly with enchantment. Their faces were pale, poised, and unreadable, ice carved into flesh. They came under a white flag, a banner of supposed peace, though every step they took was laced with tension. The courtyard, usually loud with training drills and patrols, had quieted to a heartbeat. Pack warriors stood shoulder to shoulder, hands resting near blades and claws half shifted in reflex. Suspicion thickened the air like fog. At the center of it all stood Alpha Leo, tall and imposing, dressed not for battle but for formality, dark leathers clean, his ash-gray cloak heavy with authority. He did not offer smiles or gestures of welcome, only the unyielding cold of formality. His expression was carved from granite, unreadable but alert. The fire in his dark eyes, burning low and steady, gave nothing away. The envoys bowed with precise grace, their movements choreographed by centuries of diplomacy. They scanned the gathering crowd until Leo nodded once to the guards. Lucy was brought forth. She descended the steps of the Alpha's quarters with deliberate slowness, flanked by two guards who no longer touched her. Her chains were gone, her shoulders squared, and though her ash-gray gown whispered against the stone with each step, her bearing was proud. Her crimson eyes scanned the envoys with guarded calm. She walked as a princess again, not a prisoner, though she bore the ghosts of both. Her appearance drew murmurs among the crowd. None had seen her since the execution of her warriors. Many expected madness, others, tears. But Lucy gave them neither, only silence and stature. The lead envoy, a tall vampire with snow-white hair and eyes like glass, Kaylee stepped forward. "Princess Lucy," he intoned, his voice soft but sharp as a drawn blade. "We are sent by Her Majesty, Queen Celine, to confirm your condition and convey her will." Leo watched her closely, more closely than anyone else. He saw what others missed. The tremble just beneath her surface, the way her breath hitched for a heartbeat before she answered. "I am unharmed," Lucy replied, her voice clear and resolute. "Tell my mother that Ashclaw holds no power over me. I remain myself." The envoy's thin lips pressed into a faint smile. "She will be pleased to know your spirit remains intact." Leo's jaw tightened, his hands clasped behind his back. He knew this dance well. He knew the veiled games of vampire royalty and the quiet diplomacy of wolves, but he was done playing roles. He stepped forward, his boots echoing across the stone. "You may return with your message," Leo said, his voice low and deliberate. "But carry this as well to Queen Celine. I will release and spare her daughter, the vampire heir, only if she herself surrenders to Ashclaw by the next blood moon." Gasps rippled through the courtyard. Some warriors gaped, others muttered. Even the wind seemed to still in shock. Lucy turned toward him sharply, crimson eyes wide, stunned beyond words. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The envoys looked at one another in disbelief, tension rising like a tidal wave. "You!" the lead envoy began, but Leo's raised hand cut him off. "It's time she faced what she began," Leo said, his voice now rising with steel and resolve. "If she wants her daughter safe, she must come. Alone." The envoy stared for a long moment, face hard as marble. Then, without another word, they turned in unison and vanished into mist, flashing across the snow like shadows fleeing the dawn. Silence claimed the courtyard. Lucy stood still as stone. The air around her seemed frozen. Finally, when only the crackle of torchlight remained, she turned to Leo, her voice barely above a breath. "Why are you doing this?" Leo didn't answer at first. His gaze searched her face, past the anger, past the grief, deep into the place where trust used to live, where perhaps something else had begun to take root. His voice was soft, but unshakable. "Because I need to know if your mother cares as much as you think she does." He left her standing in that cold courtyard, surrounded by wolves who weren't sure if she was a guest or a prisoner. And above them, the sky slowly darkened. The blood moon would come, and with it, either peace or ruin. Chapter 12. The Web of Deceit. The envoys from Castle Vanthe ran hard through the night, their robes whipping behind them like shadows unraveling in the wind. Each step they took pounded with urgency, echoing the weight of the message they bore, a burden too heavy for even the undead to carry lightly. The snow-laced roads stretched endlessly ahead, haunted by silence and the ever-present fear of what would await them when they returned. Queen Celine's wrath was a force known across kingdoms. But the dread that truly clenched their hearts was not hers. It was that of the man who intercepted them just before the castle gates came into view. General Klaus. He emerged from the mist like a reaper in a military coat, his tall frame outlined in cold blue moonlight. The insignia of Celine's war court gleamed like blood-red rubies across his chest. His presence alone made the lead envoy falter in step. "I trust you have news of the Queen's daughter?" Klaus asked, his voice smooth as oil poured over broken glass. A sinister smile curved his lips, the kind that promised nothing good. The envoys bowed low, their breaths steaming in the bitter air. "Yes, General," the leader answered, struggling to mask the tremor in his voice. "Alpha Leo has made an offer. He will spare Princess Lucy, but only if Queen Celine herself surrenders to Ashclaw by the next blood moon." Klaus raised one eyebrow, his amusement barely concealed. "Surrender?" he echoed, as though the word was foreign and absurd. How quaint. He began pacing slowly before them, boots crunching against the frost-hardened ground. "And Lucy? Did she appear broken? Shattered by captivity? Did the beast ruin her?" The envoys exchanged glances. Their instincts screamed that telling the truth could cost them their lives, but lying could be worse. Still, they hesitated. They had seen Lucy, regal, composed, unbroken, a woman not merely surviving but enduring with quiet fire. Klaus noticed their silence and his expression darkened. "You saw her," he said, his voice now threaded with warning. "She is my responsibility. She is royal blood. You will tell the Queen what I command." The envoy swallowed hard. "What do you wish us to say, General?" Klaus did not hesitate. "You will tell Her Majesty that Lucy is sick, tortured. You will tell her that Alpha Leo has all but broken her, that she is dying in chains, too weak to lift her head." When none of the envoys moved, Klaus's hand shot forward. In the blink of an eye, he plunged his fingers into the chest of Kylie and tore out his heart in a wet, brutal motion. The body collapsed to the earth, steaming blood pooling beneath it, coloring his ethereal silver hair. The remaining envoys recoiled in horror, their knees trembling. "Do you need further encouragement?" Klaus asked, his voice calm as if he'd only swatted a fly. The surviving envoys nodded slowly, silently, swallowing their disgust and fear. "Good," Klaus said, stepping back and letting the blood on his glove drip to the frost below. "Now go. Your queen waits." Within the towering obsidian walls of Castle Vanthe, the air was thick with a scent of rosewood and looming judgment. Queen Celine sat on her obsidian throne, carved from ancient volcanic glass, her crimson eyes glowing beneath the pale halo of moonlight filtering through stained glass. When the envoys entered the throne room, they did so with trembling limbs. They bowed deeply. "Your Majesty," the lead envoy began, his voice strained. "We bring news from Ashclaw." Celine sat forward. "Speak." They relayed Leo's offer first, the boldness of his demand, the blood moon ultimatum. Murmurs rippled through the vampire court, outrage simmering beneath composed faces. But it was when the envoys spoke of Lucy's condition, of her supposed frailty and torment, that Celine's fury truly ignited. "She is sick, my queen," the envoy lied, his eyes fixed on the polished floor. "She is tortured, barely able to stand. Alpha Leo, he is a monster. He even struck down one of us unprovoked." The queen's shriek of fury rang through the hall like a shattered bell. Her aura surged, a tempest of dark power curling around her as torches guttered in protest. "How dare he!" she screamed. "How dare he lay a hand on my daughter!" With a sweep of her hand, vases cracked and exploded against the floor. Her long hair floated around her like a cloak of midnight flame. "Summon General Klaus!" she roared. As if conjured by her rage, Klaus entered, serene and unhurried. He bowed with choreographed elegance. "Your Majesty," he said with feigned sympathy, "I understand you are distressed." "Distressed?" Celine snapped. "He tortures my child and dares make demands of me." Klaus tilted his head slightly, his voice even. "And that is why we must not falter. You are queen, not merely a mother. You must be ruler first. Let us not act recklessly." Her eyes flared again. "What do you suggest?" "A calculated response," Klaus said smoothly, stepping closer. "The werewolves believe they can provoke us into weakness. But we strike first. We strike hard, gather our armies, march on Ashclaw, leave nothing standing." Celine's breath came in sharp bursts, her fingers twitching with restrained power. "I want him broken," she hissed. "I want him to kneel before me and beg for death." "And he will," Klaus assured her. "We will raise his fortress, shatter his lineage, make the world remember what happens when royalty is threatened." A long silence followed. Then Celine stood tall, eyes alight with vengeful determination. "Prepare for war," she commanded. "Let the skies darken with our banners." "And Lucy?" she asked, a final sliver of maternal instinct piercing the veil of her wrath. Klaus's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "She will be returned to you in one piece, Your Majesty, when the war is won." And so it began. The drums of war echoed through the frozen corridors of Castle Vanth, and all the while Klaus smiled. For in the ashes of Ashclaw, he did not see a victory for Celine. He saw his throne rising. Ashclaw would fall, and he would rise, and between mother and daughter, blood and betrayal would flow like rivers. Chapter 13. The walls between them. The cold stone walls of Alpha Leo's chambers stood still and imposing, their unfeeling presence a stark contrast to the turmoil that churned within. The room was his sanctuary, yet tonight it felt different, unfamiliar, not because of the structure itself, but because of the woman who now occupied it. Lucy stood near the window, her frame silhouetted against the silver glow of the moon that bathed the landscape of Ashclaw. The night stretched wide and quiet beyond the glass, but inside, the silence was thick and humming with unspoken words. Her eyes were locked on the stars, her thoughts a storm of memories. Her mother, Queen Celine, the hallowed, darkened halls of Castle Vantha, and the childhood belief that the werewolves were nothing more than barbaric beasts. Behind her, Leo lingered in the doorway. His golden eyes scanned her carefully, taking in the proud line of her posture, the quiet defiance that refused to bend. Despite the chains of circumstance, she was not broken. She stood tall in a place built to make her small. Leo finally stepped into the room, the door whispering shut behind him with a soft click. "You'll stay here for now," he said, his tone low but firm, carrying the weight of his authority like a mantle. "Until the blood moon. After that, we'll see what happens." Lucy didn't turn to look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on the moon, as if seeking answers there. Her voice, when it came, was sharp and bitter. "I'll never like your kind," she said, her words laced with centuries of contempt. "You're all the same, cruel, merciless beasts. Just as cruel as you think vampires are." The insult cut, but Leo didn't flinch. His jaw clenched, and for a moment he seemed ready to respond. But the fire in his chest simmered instead of igniting. There was a pause, heavy and stretched thin. Finally he turned and made for the door, each step echoing with restraint. His hand hesitated on the handle. He glanced back at her one last time, but she remained unmoved, a statue carved from grief and fury. He left the room in silence, closing the door behind him like a seal between worlds. Later that night, when the moon reached its zenith and the halls of Ashclaw were hushed in slumber, Leo returned. He had sought the silence of the training yard, the edge of his blades, and the whisper of wind through pine trees to clear his mind. None of it worked. When he stepped back into his chambers, Lucy was still at the window, untouched by time. Her frame bathed in moonlight, she looked less like a prisoner and more like a specter, untouchable, unknowable. Leo stood there watching her. He wanted to say something, anything that might bridge the chasm between them, but the words wouldn't come. That pull again tugged at his chest, a need to speak, to connect, to understand. But pride, guilt, and confusion built the walls between them higher with every passing second. "I'm not here to talk," he said finally, his voice a quiet murmur, more to himself than to her. The room seemed to close in around him. With a heavy breath, he turned once more and disappeared into the hallway, leaving her with the stars. When morning came, it brought with it a sullen gray light that spilled reluctantly through thick curtains. The air held a chill that seeped into the bones. Leo entered the room again, his armor gone, replaced by a simple black tunic and breeches. He looked tired, haunted. Lucy sat in the same place, her eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. This time she turned to face him. Leo didn't waste time with niceties. "You want to know why I hate vampires?" he asked, his voice raw, stripped of its usual command. "You want to know why I've spent my whole life hating your kind?" Her silence was answer enough. He stepped closer, stopping just short of the bench. "Celine murdered my mother," he said, and there was no anger in his voice now, only sorrow. "Luna Brenda. She died when I was 9. I saw her fall, saw the venom eat through her body. She was everything to me, kind, gentle, the heart of Ashclaw. Your mother killed her." The pain that flickered in his eyes made Lucy freeze. She had heard the tales of that battle. The night the Queen turned the tide with dark magic and ruthless force. But something in Leo's voice spoke of betrayal, not war, of loss deeper than blood. She stood slowly. "It wasn't Celine," she said, her voice even but trembling with urgency. "It was General Klaus." Celine wasn't even there that night. She was in the east, negotiating territory lines. Klaus led the strike. Leo stared at her as if she'd struck him. "Klaus?" he said, the name like poison in his mouth. "You're telling me Klaus was behind my mother's death?" Lucy nodded. "Klaus manipulated Celine. He always did. He used my mother's grief over my uncle, Lucian's death, who Alpha Magnus was accused of killing. But my mother never confirmed it. Klaus wanted war, so he created it." Leo's eyes widened. "But my father never fought your uncle. He swore it. There was no battle between them." Their eyes met, and realization dawned like fire. "Blamed your father to push Celine into war. Then killed your mother and blamed her to fuel Ashclaw's hate." Leo felt the world tilt beneath him. The truth, or something close to it, had begun to crack the foundation of everything he had believed. The room went still again, not with silence, but with the reverberations of understanding. For the first time, Leo looked at Lucy not as a prisoner, not as an enemy, but as someone who might hold the key to unraveling the lies that had shaped their fates. The walls between them were still there, but they were no longer impenetrable. Chapter 14. The Alpha's Weakness. Ever since that morning in his chambers, when Lucy shattered the lie he had held onto all his life, Alpha Leo hadn't been the same. He moved through Ashclaw like a shadow, quieter than before, his footsteps silent against the stone corridors, his eyes darker, lost in memories that now felt like lies. Every word Lucy had spoken haunted him, circling through his thoughts like wolves on a hunt. General Klaus. The truth behind his mother's death. The betrayal that spanned kingdoms and bloodlines. But more than the revelation itself, it was the way she had looked at him, unafraid, unwavering, that continued to burn in his mind. She was no longer just the daughter of the enemy queen. She was the girl who might destroy everything he thought he knew. And she slept in his chambers. Not in a cell, not beneath a fortress in chains. In his room, with silken sheets, bare fur, and a warm hearth. A place no enemy had ever dared step foot. A place he had never allowed anyone to enter. Lucy had defied every rule by merely existing in his space. She never thanked him for the comfort, nor did she soften toward him. Her silence was a sharp blade, her presence a constant reminder of the war between their kind. But there was a grace in her resistance, a strange, alluring dignity in the way she held herself, even in the heart of her enemy's stronghold. Leo found himself drawn to her in ways he didn't understand, and couldn't allow. He watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. The way she sipped the blood he provided, freshly drawn, warmed just enough, served with trembling hands by servants who couldn't meet her eyes. Except it wasn't always the servants. More and more it was Leo himself. She would sit in the courtyard beneath the archways carved from ancient wolf bone, her gaze fixed on the skies while she drank. Leo would take a place beside her, not speaking, not demanding, just sitting, watching. And Alpha Magnus, his father, saw it all. From the high balconies of Ashclaw Fortress, the old Alpha watched his son with narrowed eyes, his mouth twisted with quiet fury. "He watches her like she's a delicate flower," Beta Harland sneered one gray-skied afternoon. His voice was a growl barely hidden beneath respect. Alpha Magnus's eyes were colder than frost. "She's a leech," he said flatly. "She should have been put to death like the rest." Beta Harland nodded, arms folded. His gaze, like Magnus's, lingered below. "He's gone soft. He's forgotten who she is." There was a grim silence. "She's Celine's spawn," Magnus continued, voice dripping venom. "And he's treating her like a Luna in waiting. It's disgraceful." The word Luna hit the air like a curse. But inside the courtyard, Leo heard none of it. He was too busy watching the vampire girl. How her pale skin shimmered under the overcast light, how her crimson eyes gleamed with an eternal defiance. She barely acknowledged him. But when she did, when those eyes met his, the air between them turned molten. Charged, dangerous. She hated him. She made that clear with every cold glance, every stiff word, and yet Leo protected her. When a warrior lunged at her one evening in the corridor, spitting slurs and fury, Leo's claws were at the man's throat before anyone blinked. He pinned the wolf to the wall, snarling in a voice the fortress hadn't heard in years. "Touch her again, and you'll die by my hand." The warrior had been banished that night. Not killed. Leo wasn't that far gone. But the message was clear. Lucy belonged to no one. But she was under his protection. The fortress whispered. They whispered of the Alpha's shame. They whispered of the strange, soft looks he gave the vampire girl. They whispered that the war-born son of Magnus had fallen to a temptress with crimson eyes. And the whispers reached further than the walls. Allies began to question Leo's strength. Enemies watched with renewed hunger. In the dark corners of the realm, the winds began to change. But Leo didn't care. He couldn't explain what tethered him to Lucy, what invisible thread refused to snap no matter how many times he tried to pull away. Maybe it was the way she carried her pain. With silence, with steel, with dignity he had never seen in his own kind. Maybe it was the fire she held even in her most broken moments. Or maybe it was that she, like him, had been shaped by lies, had survived betrayal, had lost a parent to the cruelty of war. He didn't understand it. But every time he looked at her, the hatred in his chest dulled. The anger lost its edge. And for the first time in his life, Leo feared something more than war. He feared the girl who made him feel. He feared what she might awaken inside him. The Alpha of Ashclaw, the war-forged son of Luna Brenda and Magnus the Ruthless, was unraveling. And it all began with a vampire girl who refused to bow, who met him eye for eye, and who, perhaps, might be the only one who truly saw him, even if the whole world burned for it. Chapter 15. The Eve of Blood Moon. The obsidian towers of Castle Vanth trembled with whispers as the blood moon's rise drew near, casting a crimson hue across the velvet night sky. From the highest spires to the deepest catacombs, the very stones of the vampire stronghold seemed to pulse with foreboding. The magic embedded in the castle walls stirred restlessly, as if sensing the approaching storm. Queen Celine, sovereign of vampire kind and ruler of Castle Vanth, stood before her ancient mirror, draped in midnight silk that fluttered like shadows around her. Her long raven-black hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her eyes, deep crimson pools of timeless wisdom and power, burned with a fury barely contained. But this night, they also shimmered with something rare and aching, sorrow. Her reflection revealed more than beauty. It exposed a mother's torment. Rage, sorrow, and a fierce, unrelenting resolve stormed within her. She had ruled for centuries with an iron heart, never yielding, never wavering. Her name was both feared and revered. Yet for the first time in her immortal reign, Queen Celine felt the pull of surrender. Not from weakness, but from love. The thought of Leo, Alpha of Ashclaw, tormentor of her blood, harming her daughter was a pain sharper than any blade. Lucy. Her daughter. Her pride. Her legacy. Raised in the cold elegance of Castle Vanth, trained in the arts of statecraft and combat, destined to rule beside her. She had watched Lucy grow from a fierce child into a powerful young woman. And now, she was in the hands of wolves. Celine had read the envoy's report a dozen times. The words told of Lucy's capture, her imprisonment, the lack of torture, but the bond between them spoke louder. She could feel Lucy's presence still alive, still unbroken. Their bloodline's ancient link pulsed like a silent heartbeat in her chest. She stood tall, shoulders squared, her voice calm but thunderous as she turned to her court. "I will go," she said. "I will surrender myself to the wolves. For my daughter." Gasps rippled through the throne room, but none dared question her. None except General Klaus. Draped in regal black and silver armor, Klaus stepped forward from the shadows, his face carved in stoic disbelief. His crimson eyes narrowed, jaw tight with fury hidden behind a mask of loyalty. This was not the plan. Celine was meant to crush Ashclaw beneath her heel, to bathe the blood moon in vengeance, and both her and Ashclaw should end themselves. Not to bend the knee, not to offer herself to the beasts that stole her heir. Klaus had stood by her side for decades, whispering counsel, guiding her rage. And now, it was all crumbling. He bowed, lips curled into a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "As you wish, my queen," he murmured. But behind those crimson irises, rage burned. He would not allow this. He had worked too long, sacrificed too much. Klaus had steered Celine away from peace, fanned the flames of hate. He had orchestrated her darkness, nurtured it into a weapon that could shatter the world. Her surrender would undo it all. The balance of power, the whispers of rebellion, the loyal troops he had trained in the shadows, everything would collapse. No, she would not walk willingly into Ashclaw. So that night, cloaked in shadow, Klaus slipped away. He rode through the cursed woodlands of Sintra, into the forbidden vaults of the eastern mountains, where the earth wept blood and the spirits of damned witches howled in eternal unrest. There, beneath an altar scorched by ancient flame, Klaus retrieved the vial of Narzek, a poison unlike any other. Crafted centuries ago by mad warlocks, the vial was forged from the essence of vampire elders, the ash of werewolf bones, and the cursed venom of the worm serpents. It was said to rot the soul of wolves and burn through vampire bloodlines like fire through parchment. With grim precision, Klaus returned to Castle Vanth. In the quietest hour before dawn, he poured the poison into the blood reserve, used to nourish and strengthen his secret army. His private army, hand-selected, loyal only to him, drank from that poison stream. Their fangs stained with betrayal, their veins pulsed with quiet doom. They felt nothing. Yet, but their fate had already been sealed. They had trained in silence beneath the castle, far from prying eyes, conditioned to obey, conditioned to kill. Klaus's secret kingdom, forged in loyalty, hatred, death, and venom. The following day, as the blood moon loomed above the horizon, Celine prepared for her journey to Broken Fang Ridge, where the Ashclaw emissaries had offered a neutral ground for exchange. The castle stood quiet as she passed through its halls. Nobles and guards bowed, but none spoke. None dared to ask why. Her silence was their answer. Klaus watched from the shadows, fury hidden beneath feigned sorrow. Let her walk. Let her think she controls this. Because soon he would take everything. Celine walked toward her destiny, unaware of the death coiled around her court, slithering beneath her rule. Her heart carried only one thing, Lucy, her daughter. Her last light in the darkness. The blood moon was rising, and fate was preparing to strike. Chapter 16. The Crimson Sky. The day of the blood moon dawned heavy and slow, its sky drenched in a haunting crimson glow that spilled across the heavens like spilled wine. The air was thick with prophecy, humming with a tension so sharp it seemed to pulse in the bones of every creature that stirred beneath it. Even the trees surrounding Ashclaw Fortress, gnarled ancient things twisted by time and blood, seemed to brace themselves, their branches groaning low, as though nature itself feared what the night would bring. Within the high stone walls of Ashclaw, the stronghold of wolfkind, preparations surged like a rising tide. Warriors moved with grim purpose, sharpening blades that glinted under the eerie light, checking armor and battle lines. Every wolf could feel it, the blood moon's call, the ancient pull that sang in their blood and stirred something primal deep in their cores. It was the night of instincts, of sacred rage and sharpened senses, but not all hearts in Ashclaw beat for war. In the quiet sanctuary of the Alpha's private chambers, far from the clang of steel and the battle cries echoing through the fortress, Lucy sat in stillness. She was perched at a carved stone vanity, bathed in the blood-colored light pouring through the high-arched windows. Una moved with gentle fingers, weaving Lucy's long dark curls into intricate braids, her touch reverent. Lucy's red eyes, deep and layered with emotion, stared at her reflection, not with vanity, but with quiet reckoning. Her gaze held more than beauty, it shimmered with dread, with anger, with a glimmer of hope that felt too fragile to name. She was going to see her mother again. That should have made her feel joy, but instead it made her restless, as if her skin were too tight around her bones. Across the room, Alpha Leo stood silently, dressed in the ceremonial black and silver cloak of Ashclaw. His tall frame radiated authority, yet his expression was solemn. His chestnut hair had been tied back with silver ritual cords, and his piercing hazel eyes, dark as forest earth, shadowed by sleepless nights, were locked on Lucy. He watched her as if she were the answer to every question that tormented him. A mystery, a curse, a spark of salvation he couldn't untangle. He had come to care for her, perhaps even more than he dared admit. Lucy felt his gaze, and part of her heart rebelled against the warmth it stirred in her. But another part, quieter, deeper, welcomed it. She had been raised to hate him, trained to see the wolf prince as an enemy. Yet as the days bled into nights, she had come to understand the man behind the scars and rage. Leo was not what she had been taught to fear, and that complicated everything. She reached for the deep silver robe folded beside her and drew it around her shoulders. It had been Leo's offering, a garment woven with the threads of truce, signifying peace under Ashclaw's roof. It felt like a chain and a shield all at once. "I should be happy," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the rustle of fabric. She did not look at him. Leo took a slow step closer, his tone low and steady. "You're not. I'm happy to see my mother," she said, her voice growing taut. "But not like this. She shouldn't be the one surrendering. If anyone deserves punishment, it's General Klaus, not her." Leo's jaw flexed. He had turned Lucy's words over in his mind night after night, her accusations, her truths, her pain. That Celine had not killed his mother, that it was Klaus. But truth was a fragile thing in Ashclaw. To his warriors, to his father, it didn't matter. They already believed the worst. They believed Lucy had bewitched him, seduced him into blindness. They saw a traitor in their Alpha's reflection. He stepped closer still, his shadow merging with hers. "I want to believe you," he said quietly, his voice a storm contained. "But right now, even if I told them, no one would listen. Their hatred for your kind is deep." Lucy stood slowly, turning to face him. Her figure was statuesque, her eyes twin flames. The light of the blood moon filtered in behind her, wrapping her in a halo of crimson. She looked like prophecy, like danger dressed in sorrow. "Then what happens to her?" she demanded. "I made the offer," Leo said. "Your mother surrenders, and you go free. There's no war." Lucy's breath hitched. "And you think that ends it?" she asked. Her voice cracked under the weight of a truth too bitter to swallow. "What then? You'll keep her here, leashed like a dog? Or you'll kill her? Because no one in Ashclaw will believe your truth?" Leo said nothing, and the silence between them stretched into something heavy. Lucy's shoulders trembled. "I never asked for any of this," she whispered. "But now I'm here. I just want my mother, and I want Klaus dead, mercilessly. No honor, no mercy." Leo's breath stirred the air between them as he stepped forward, close enough now to touch her. "I will protect you," he said, voice low but certain. "And when your mother comes, if there's even a chance Klaus is behind this, I will find it. I'll uncover everything. I swear it." Her eyes searched his, and she saw no deception. Only fire. Only the man she had come to understand in the shadows of war. "Do you swear it?" she asked, her voice a thread away from breaking. Leo met her gaze unflinching. "I swear it." And something unspoken passed between them then, a thread of fate tightening. Then the bells of Ashclaw rang. 1, 2, 3. They rang for the blood moon. Chapter 17. The Night of the Blood Moon. In the obsidian halls of Castle Vanth, the air felt like smoke and sorrow. Queen Selene, sovereign of vampire kind, stood in her chamber. She wore mourning black, a gown of flowing onyx silk, laced with twilight thread and ancient symbols of power. Her crown rested heavy upon her head, not with pride, but with purpose. Her crimson eyes dimmed by anguish. She had dressed slowly that night, every movement a prayer, every knot tied with aching purpose. Tonight was not about pride or conquest. It was about love, a mother's love that defied empires. She was ready to go to Broken Fang Ridge alone, as requested by Alpha Leo. The thought had tormented her since the moment she agreed, but her resolve had not wavered. She would offer herself in exchange for Lucy's freedom. She had ruled an age of blood with an iron crown, yet it was for her daughter that she would kneel. But fate, as ever, had sharper plans. As soon as Selene stepped out of the throne room, a silent shadow moved. Before she could summon a word of protest, pain exploded in her skull and darkness swallowed her whole. The corridor twisted. Her body crumpled. She never reached the carriage. The blood moon climbed above the world like a judgment, a monstrous red eye staring down at the land. Its light bled over Sintra, turning rivers to veins and trees into clawed silhouettes. And under that cursed sky, destiny marched. On the edge of Broken Fang Ridge, beneath the towering spires of gnarled trees and fractured stones where treaties were etched, Alpha Leo waited. His frame was tense beneath his ceremonial armor, the sigil of Ashclaw bright on his chest. Beside him, cloaked in silver, stood Lucy. The wind slithered through the clearing like a serpent, and even the birds refused to sing. Lucy's fingers clenched the folds of her robe as she scanned the tree line. "She's late," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath, her pulse a drumbeat of dread. Leo said nothing. His eyes were fixed forward, brows drawn in storm-born tension, his heart beat hard in his chest, a rhythm out of sync with the world. And then, they came. From the shadows of the forest, hundreds of eyes blinked open, not golden, not wolf, dark red, unholy, glowing with the light of undeath, not Queen Selene, not peace, an ambush. General Klaus's vampire army surged forth like a tidal wave of decay. They emerged from the trees, faces gaunt and twisted, clad in dark armor splattered with fresh blood. Their fangs glistened, and from their veins surged the vial of Narzek, an ancient poison that devoured souls and turned living blood into rot. Forged in the cursed mountains, it had been meant to end the wolves, and now it would. The first scream tore through the night like a blade. Ashclaw warriors shifted instantly, howls rising into the sky. Fur erupted, bones cracked, and the ground trembled beneath the fury of werewolves, but it was not enough. The venom worked fast. One scratch, one bite, and warriors collapsed mid-shift. Their bodies writhed, spasmed, choked on their own blood. Their eyes glazed, their minds broke. Leo roared. He turned only to see a vampire leaping at Lucy, claws outstretched. She shrieked, stumbling backward. Then, bones shattered, flesh stretched, and the alpha became beast. Leo's wolf form was a titan, broad and brutal, with thick brown-gray fur and eyes blazing with fury. He collided with the vampire mid-air, tearing it to ribbons with fang and claw. He spun, blood flying, snarling with primal rage. But for every monster he killed, two more came. Another vampire sank its teeth into his side. Leo howled. The venom was fire. It burned through his veins like molten iron. He staggered. Lucy's voice pierced through the chaos. "Leo!" His vision blurred, but her face, terrified, anchored him. He dropped low, his body trembling. "Get on!" His voice roared into her mind, pure command. She didn't hesitate. She climbed onto his back, hands gripping thick fur. "Retreat!" Leo's voice thundered, both aloud and through the mind link. Wounded, surrounded, bleeding, the Alpha of Ashclaw ran. He charged through smoke and fire, past dying warriors and shattering trees. His claws tore up the earth. Behind them, vampires howled in bloodlust. He didn't stop. He couldn't. For Lucy, for the truth, for the future he didn't dare hope for. High above, the blood moon pulsed, and from a dark cliff beyond the battlefield, General Klaus watched the chaos he had crafted. He stood tall, his armor black as void, his cape fluttering in the poisoned wind. A cruel smile curved his lips as he watched Leo vanish into the trees with Lucy on his back. "Run, little princess," he murmured. "Run home. You've only just tasted the beginning of the end." Chapter 18. The Howl of the Dying Alpha. The gates of Ashclaw Fortress groaned open beneath the weight of the blood-soaked night. Their iron frames shrieked like wounded beasts as they were flung wide, revealing a sight that halted every heart within the walls. Alpha Leo, the heart and strength of Ashclaw, staggered forward in his massive wolf form, muscles trembling, legs unsteady. His fur, once gleaming with regal pride, was matted and stained with thick, inky blood, laced with threads of venom that hissed and bubbled on his flesh like acid. On his back, wrapped in his coarse fur like a ghost clinging to life, Lucy held on. Her arms were tight around him, her face streaked with blood, soot, and tears. The wind tore through the courtyard as they entered, carrying with it the stench of blood, poison, and war. "Just a little more," she whispered through gritted teeth, her voice trembling. Her fingers clenched tighter around his fur. "Please, Leo, don't stop now." The massive wolf made it only as far as the center of the courtyard. Then, with a groan that sounded almost human, his legs gave out. Bones cracked, fur receded, flesh folded. Leo shifted, his body twisting until he collapsed in his human form, bare and broken upon the cold stone. His skin was slick with sweat and blood, his breaths jagged and shallow. The black veins of venom curled up his sides like serpents. Lucy dropped beside him, ignoring the blood and the eyes watching from the shadows. She cradled his head on her lap, stroking dirt and blood from his face. "Leo? No, no, stay with me," she pleaded, her voice cracking with each word. "Don't you dare die now. Don't you dare—" From the vaulted entrance of the fortress, a sound rose, boots pounding against stone, voices shouting, metal clashing as weapons were drawn in alarm. Alpha Magnus appeared first, the steel-gray streak in his dark hair catching the moonlight. His face twisted in horror. "My son!" he bellowed, dropping to his knees, grasping Leo's blood-slick arm. Beta Harlan was right behind him, his sharp eyes snapping between Leo's crumpled form and the figure hunched protectively over him. "Lucy." The guards hesitated, watching the Alpha's air bleed and writhe, and seeing the enemy holding him like a lifeline. Whispers broke like waves. "The venom. He's infected. It's killing him." Lucy pressed her hands to the wound. Then Magnus's voice thundered across the courtyard, filled with rage and grief. "You brought this death upon him," he snarled at her. Your kind." Lucy's mouth opened, her red eyes wide with hurt and disbelief. "I didn't, he saved me. Guards, seize her," Magnus roared. "Take her to the dungeons." The guards surged forward. Rough hands yanked Lucy away from Leo. "No, don't touch me," she screamed, clawing at their arms. "He needs help. Help him. If you don't treat him now, he'll die." Leo's lips parted. A whisper of a sound slipped past his bloodied lips. "Lucy." But she was already being dragged away, her feet scraping the stone, her voice growing distant as the doors to the dungeon swallowed her scream. Down in the cold stone bowels of Ashclaw, Lucy collapsed against the wall, gasping, sobbing. Her face was wet with tears and fury. She had seen the truth of Klaus. She had seen the venom. She had seen love in the eyes of a wolf raised to hate her, and now she was caged like a monster. Above her, in the highest chambers of the keep, Alpha Leo writhed in fevered torment. His skin burned, his muscles spasmed, his heartbeat slowed to the rhythm of death. He was dying. Outside, the blood moon loomed, heavy and silent, a cursed sentinel in the night sky. And far away, hidden in the crypts of Castle Vanth, Queen Selene remained imprisoned in darkness, not by enemies, but by the betrayal of her own. General Klaus's plan had begun. The war for Sintra had truly begun, and the howl of the dying Alpha echoed through the mountains, a sound of love, fury, and the beginning of something greater than blood. Chapter 19. The quiet between the storms. Weeks had passed since the massacre under the blood moon, but the memory still clawed at Lucy's mind like a rabid beast refusing to die. Her cell in the lower dungeons of Ashclaw Fortress was no wider than a coffin and twice as cold. Damp stone surrounded her on all sides, and the scent of mildew and old blood haunted every breath she took. A single barred window let in a sliver of light each morning, mocking her with the promise of freedom just out of reach. She sat curled in a tight ball, her knees drawn to her chest, chin resting on them, crimson eyes dulled by exhaustion and despair. Her thoughts churned like storm water in a basin too shallow to hold it all. Mother, are you still alive? Did you survive that night? Do you think I'm dead? She swallowed hard. The image of Queen Selene, regal, defiant, unyielding, rose in her mind like a ghost. Had she been captured? Killed? Or had she escaped while Klaus's treachery unfolded? And Leo, her chest tightened painfully. Did he make it? She remembered the way his body convulsed from the venom, the way his voice, barely audible, had called her name even as he lay dying, the sound of his heartbeat growing fainter with each step she was dragged away. She hugged herself tighter. General Klaus, I will never forgive him. Her teeth clenched as she stared at the stone wall in front of her. Rage simmered behind her sorrow, pure, unyielding hatred. Klaus had taken everything, her people, her mother, and now possibly the only man who had ever dared to look at her without disgust or fear. Above her, far from the dungeon's shadows, Alpha Leo stirred. The poison that had ravaged his body had not won. Sintra's finest healers, brought in secret, had battled the venom with rare elixirs and old magic. Leo had been unconscious for days, barely able to breathe, his body caught in the cruel tug of war between life and death. And yet, on a cold dawn swathed in fog, his eyes fluttered open. A shallow breath rattled from his lips. The first name he whispered was hers. Lucy. He tried to sit up, but pain lanced through his core like fire. No, came his father's firm voice. Alpha Magnus stood by the bedside, arms crossed, eyes storm dark. Don't even think about it. You will not go near her again. Leo winced as he turned his head. She didn't. The council believes she bewitched you. They think your judgment has been poisoned. Do not disgrace this family further. Leo's wolf snarled within him, but he said nothing. For now. Later that night, when the moon sat high and pale above the fortress, Beta Harlan appeared outside Leo's chamber. He looked tired, worn. You love her, he said, not as an accusation but a truth. I've seen it. Leo stared at him, silent. I'm going to regret this, Harlan muttered. Then he handed Leo a key. You have 5 minutes. Make them count. Leo didn't waste a second. They crept through the dim corridors of Ashclaw, passing snoring guards and flickering torches. Every echo of his bare feet on stone reminded him how fragile this moment was. But he didn't care. Not anymore. When he reached the dungeon door, his hand trembled as he unlocked it. Inside, she sat in the same position she always did, her frame small and still, a ghost of the fierce woman she had been. She looked up as the door creaked. Leo? Her voice was small, almost broken. He crossed the room in 2 strides and wrapped her in his arms. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. She didn't trust it. Then, like a dam bursting, she collapsed into him, arms tightening around his waist, her face buried in his chest. I thought you were dead, she breathed, her voice shaking. I almost was. He whispered, his hands threading into her hair. But I couldn't leave you here. Not like this. They held each other in silence, the cold forgotten in the warmth of their embrace. He led her from the dungeon, cautious and silent. When they reached Harlan again, the beta gave a single nod. Don't ask me for this again. I won't, Leo promised. Instead of returning her to a guarded tower or another prison, Leo brought her to his private chambers. It was soft, warm, lit by firelight and layered in furs. Here, the war felt far away. He drew a bath with warm water and herbs. Then, without a word, he lifted her into it. He didn't turn away. He stayed. He knelt beside her and gently washed the grime from her skin. Her hands trembled, her lips quivered. When the bath was done, he wrapped her in blankets and sat her near the hearth. There, he brought her warm, fresh rabbit blood in a crystal goblet. She drank it slowly, eyes locked to his. He sat behind her and slowly began to braid her hair. His fingers fumbled at first, alpha hands not used to tenderness, but he kept going. She didn't speak. He didn't either. Later they lay together, not in passion, not in battle, but in something quieter, more dangerous. They lay on opposite sides of the bed, both staring up at the dark wood beams of the ceiling, their fingers just barely brushing in the space between them. "I hate him," she whispered. "I know," he replied. Silence followed. Not the kind that crushes, but the kind that breathes, that lives, and in the hush of Ashclaw Fortress, beneath layers of sorrow and silence, something grew in the cracks between their broken pieces. Not fear, not hatred, but something born in the quiet between the storms, something dangerous, something beautiful. Chapter 20. The Queen in the Coffin. A faint scent of earth and decay clung to the air, thick as a shroud. Dampness pressed in from all sides. Silence swallowed every sound, broken only by the slow, panicked thud of her heart. Darkness was complete, total, until even the thought of light felt like a distant dream. Queen Selene stirred, her fingers twitching against smooth wood that radiated a slow burning agony. Her crimson eyes snapped open, wide with terror. She tried to move, but her limbs were bound, wrapped in silken ropes laced with oakwood threads. Her wrists screamed with pain. The interior of the coffin, lined with enchanted oak, lethal to vampire kind, sizzled against her skin like acid. Panic surged. Where am I?" Her breaths came shallow and fast, rasping against the stale air. Her voice caught in her throat as she tried to scream, but all that escaped was a dry croak. The darkness pressed closer, threatening to crush her. Then, light. A harsh, sudden sliver of it. The coffin lid creaked open with a groaning moan, and above her appeared the sharp, angular face of General Klaus. He smiled. "Good evening, Your Majesty," he said, his voice silk-wrapped in malice. Selene blinked, struggling to understand, until comprehension hit like a blade. "Klaus, what have you done?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried the weight of command. "Oh, everything," he purred, crouching beside the open coffin. He held a wooden dagger in his gloved hand, its oak tip sharp as a knife. It pulsed faintly in the torchlight, as if eager to taste royal blood. "I bound you the night of the blood moon," Klaus began, his tone almost conversational. His crimson eyes sparkled with sadistic joy. "You were going to ruin centuries of planning, all because of a daughter you should have sacrificed the day she was born." Selene's expression froze, her lips parted in disbelief. "You stopped me." "From going to Lucy?" "Yes," Klaus hissed. "Because I never intended for you to see her again. I told the envoys to lie. To tell you Lucy was sick and tortured so you'd burn with fury. So you'd summon the armies, call for war, burn down Ashclaw. But instead, you chose surrender. A queen surrendering for love. How tragic." He shook his head, lips curling into a sneer. Pathetic. Selene's crimson eyes narrowed to slits. "Why?" she demanded, voice trembling with rage. Klaus leaned closer, eyes gleaming with centuries of venom. "Because I've always hated you," he said softly. "I served you, protected you, lied for you, killed for you, and all the while I watched you rule from a throne that should have been mine. I am not your servant, Selene. I am a king in exile, and I will see this empire reborn, without you." He smiled again, cruel and wide. "Did you ever wonder who started the war with the werewolves? Who killed Luna Brenda, the beloved maid of Alpha Magnus?" "That was me." Selene's breath caught. "I slaughtered her in the forests of Black Hollow, then left signs pointing to your blade. I sowed the seeds of hatred, watched your kingdoms turn on each other like rabid beasts. I killed your brother, Lucian, framed Alpha Magnus for it, and you played your part perfectly. You caused all this, she breathed, her voice shattered with disbelief. All of it, Klaus replied, as if relishing each word. And now, I finish what I started. Celine didn't scream. She didn't beg. She lay in the coffin, her gaze like steel, her pride unbroken even in the face of betrayal. I hope the throne poisons you, she said coldly. Klaus chuckled. I am the poison, he whispered. And then, thud! The wooden dagger plunged into her chest, burned through her like wildfire. Her body arched, a final gasp escaping her lips, but her gaze never left Klaus's face. A single tear rolled down her pale cheek. May you always be happy wherever you are. My dearest Lucy, she whispered with her last breath. Her eyes fluttered, then closed, forever. Silence reclaimed the tomb. Klaus stood over her body, breathing hard. Victory coursed through his veins. Decades, centuries of ambition had led to this moment, and now nothing stood in his way. Or so he thought. Unbeknownst to him, just beyond the heavy chamber door, a figure crouched in the shadows, a young vampire with wide, terrified eyes and silver hair that glinted like moonlight. Vasily, one of the youngest knights in Celine's court. Loyal, quick, sharp. He had followed the general out of suspicion, and now he had witnessed everything. His hand trembled on the hilt of his blade, his breath caught in his throat, but he did not rush in. He knew better. He had to survive. For her. As Klaus turned his back and began sealing the coffin again, Vasily turned and ran, through winding corridors, past silent sentries. I have to find her. I have to tell her. The words repeated in his mind like a mantra. Princess Lucy must know. Sintra must know. The queen was dead. The kingdom hung by a thread, and only the princess could stop what was coming next. Vasily vanished into the darkness, the fate of vampire kind resting on his swift feet and pounding heart. He had to find Lucy, before it was too late. Chapter 21. The Truth in the Shadows. The night was still in Ashclaw, cloaked in a tense and suffocating silence that hung over the land like a pall. After the brutal massacre beneath the blood moon, wounds, both seen and unseen, lingered like ghosts. The fortress walls still bore the scent of blood and ash. Most of the pack had not yet healed, not truly. Neither had their alpha, nor had the vampire girl whose presence was still whispered about in fearful curiosity. But something stirred within the silence. A figure moved through the darkness, swift and cloaked, like a whisper cutting through a dream. It was Vasily, the young vampire knight who had once knelt before Queen Celine, sworn to her and her alone. Now, his heart thundered with dread and purpose as he moved with desperate speed across Sintra's perilous divide. He was not running from anything. He was running to someone. He had to reach her. His queen's final command echoed in his heart, not with words, but with the memory of her dignity, the fire in her eyes, and the silent plea she'd left in the wake of her betrayal. He had crossed cursed rivers, hidden through daylight in the hollows of dead trees, and now, soaked to the bone, he crept along a shadowed creek beneath the fortress wall of Ashclaw. There, just before his final step, he was spotted. Beta Harlan, Ashclaw's enforcer, sharp-eyed, deadly, always alert. He lunged from the shadows, his blade unsheathed, ready to strike, until Vasily dropped to his knees. I mean no harm, Vasily gasped, his voice raw, breathless. I come with an important message for Princess Lucy. Harlan paused, eyes narrowing. His wolf instincts flared, searching for deception. But what he found instead was grief, not the kind born from manipulation, but the deep, soul-breaking kind, the grief of someone who had lost everything. Reluctantly, Harlan lowered his weapon. Within the hour, a secret meeting was arranged in the lower chambers of the fortress. The stone walls of the underground held the chill of secrets, the kind that could shatter nations. Alpha Leo stood tall, his stance tense, while Lucy sat across from him, her eyes wary, her posture guarded. Harlan hovered near the wall like a shadow, his expression unreadable. Vasily stood before them, still drenched from travel, but now composed enough to speak the truth, and when he did, it fell like thunder. General Klaus killed Queen Selene, Vasily said, his voice trembling despite himself. He bound her the night of the blood moon. He stopped her from coming to get you, princess. He sealed her inside a coffin made of enchanted oak, then stabbed her heart with an oak dagger, laced with poison meant to kill even the oldest of our kind. For a moment, Lucy didn't move. Her breath hitched once, twice, before her entire body crumbled. A soundless sob escaped her throat as she collapsed to the floor. No, she was coming for me. She never abandoned me, she wept, her voice cracking into a million pieces. Leo was beside her instantly, his arms wrapped around her, holding her as if she might vanish if he let go. She buried her face in his chest, and the fortress bore witness to a grief that could split the heavens. She died for me, she whispered, over and over again, as if trying to convince herself that her mother's love had been real. Leo held her tighter. He said nothing, for there were no words that could ease that kind of loss. But the fury behind his silence burned like wildfire. Vasily's voice cracked as he continued, tears falling freely. He's taken the throne. He poisoned his army with the vial of Narsec. He framed Queen Selene. He started the war with the werewolves. He's the reason your mother and Alpha Magnus hated each other. He's the monster that broke the world. A stillness fell across the room. Beta Harlan rose slowly to his full height, his eyes dark. Not all vampires are monsters, he said, his voice low and lethal. He looked at Lucy, curled in Leo's arms. But now I know exactly which one must die. That night, Lucy remained with Leo, wrapped in his warmth. She cried quietly against him, her tears soaking into his chest, her pain echoing in his heartbeat. He whispered no promises, only held her tighter. The morning after, the sun barely crept above the horizon when Lucy left Leo's chamber. Her eyes were swollen, her hair tangled, her dress loose. She needed air, needed to move. She ran into the woods, her feet pounded the earth, her breath sharp in her lungs. She screamed into the trees, releasing every shard of grief inside her. Then, with trembling hands, she began building a tomb of stones for her mother. Each stone laid was a prayer, each flower placed, a memory. As she knelt to finish her offering, a sharp scream pierced the woods. A little wolf pup, no older than 10, barely shifted into fur, ran through the trees, wild with terror. Behind him, a vampire sprinted, eyes wild, veins black, teeth bared, one of Klaus's soldiers, still poisoned by the vial of Narsec. Lucy didn't hesitate. She ran, fueled by pain and fury. She threw herself between the child and the vampire, her body a shield, her hands burning with power. The vampire lunged, but she met him with a snarl. They fought like storm and flame. He clawed, she struck. He roared, she screamed. And finally, she snapped his neck, the sound echoing like a thunderclap through the trees. Silence fell again. The pup had fled. But he had also alerted Ashclaw. Alpha, Leo, Magnus, and Harlan arrived minutes later, fury in their eyes, only to find Lucy standing over the vampire's corpse, his black blood staining her dress, her skin, her soul. She trembled but stood tall, bloodied and unbroken. Leo was the first to move. He wrapped his arms around her again as her small frame gave out and she cried once more. For her mother, for her people, for the war that had never truly ended. Magnus stood back, eyes narrowed. He looked at her, the vampire who had just saved one of their own, and something inside him shifted. Something deep. Beta Harlan stepped forward and spoke low to him. He told him everything. About Vasily's message, about Queen Selene's murder, about Luna Brenda's death, not at Selene's hands, but Klaus's. And Magnus's jaw clenched as the world he'd known crumbled. When the sun had fully risen, Leo stood atop the fortress walls. His presence was commanding, his alpha aura thick in the air. Warriors gathered below, faces grim, hands ready. Beta Harlan stood at his side. Leo's voice rang out, strong and unflinching. General Klaus murdered Queen Selene. He poisoned both vampires and werewolves. He framed her for the death of my mother, your Luna, and ignited a war that has taken too many lives. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. I once called her kind my enemy, but not today. Today she saved one of our own, he said, pointing out toward Lucy today. We stand not for our wolfkin, but for truth, for justice, for those we lost at Broken Fang Ridge. He raised his hand to the air. We fight to end the monster who made us hate. The warriors of Ashclaw howled in unison. Even Magnus, the battle-hardened alpha, stepped forward. Vasily confirmed what he feared. His mate, Luna Brenda, was a casualty of Klaus's war. I want his head, Magnus growled, and no one dared speak against him. That day, the warriors of Ashclaw trained like never before. Leo sparred with relentless fury. His every move was honed, brutal, precise. Beside him, Lucy moved like a blade through shadow, faster, sharper, deadlier. Her mourning had not faded, but her purpose had crystallized. To end this war, to avenge her mother, to destroy Klaus. Together, they became a storm, shadow and fire. Two hearts once born into hatred, now beating with the same fire. And high above them, the memory of the blood-red moon lingered in the sky of their minds, whispering the same promise. One final war was coming, and they would be ready. Chapter 22. The Truth of the Bond. The moon hung low that evening, a pale silver disk casting its quiet glow over Ashclaw Fortress. It shimmered across the jagged rooftops and fortress walls, softening the brutal architecture of war with its cold light. The night, for the first time in weeks, was still. There were no war drums, no alarms or cries of mourning. The training bells remained silent, and the scent of blood no longer lingered in the corridors. It was a fragile peace, an interlude between storms. Inside Alpha Leo's chambers, the fire crackled gently in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across stone walls scarred by generations of warriors. The scent of pine wood and ash mingled with the faint aroma of parchment and old ink. Lucy sat by the window, her frame cloaked in a soft robe, her knees tucked under her chin. A thick werewolf tome rested open in her lap, one of the many that Leo had given her during their uneasy truce. She turned the pages absently, her dark lashes low over her eyes, her thoughts elsewhere. Her long dark hair was braided loosely down her back, tendrils curling from the braid like whispers of smoke. She was trying to distract herself, but her mind wandered endlessly to the grave of stones she had built in the woods that morning. To her mother. And then she sensed him. Before he said a word, Leo stood quietly by the chamber door. His hand rested on the wooden frame as though steadying himself, and his usually bold demeanor was tempered by something raw. Vulnerability. He looked as though he had fought 1,000 battles today, and this moment, here, now, was the hardest one of all. Lucy, he said, his voice low and gravel-edged. She turned slowly, lifting her head. Their eyes met. Hers softened, curious, concerned. What is it? She asked. He stepped forward, his stride deliberate, yet hesitant. His expression was guarded but serious, more serious than she had ever seen it. If we're going to a major war, there's something I need to tell you, he said. Something I should have told you before the blood moon. Before everything fell apart. Lucy blinked and closed the book gently, placing it on the windowsill. She shifted to face him more fully, her brows drawing together in faint worry. What is it? Leo drew in a breath, as if readying himself for battle. You're my fated mate, Lucy. The words echoed through the chamber like thunderclaps in a quiet storm. The fire in the hearth cracked, and the wind outside seemed to still. Lucy stared at him. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. What? She breathed. He moved a step closer, eyes locked on hers. It doesn't happen often, he said gently. In our world, it's rare to be mated to another creature except wolf. Most of us go our whole lives without ever feeling it. But I knew it the moment I saw you. Even when I hated what you were. I couldn't hate you. My wolf, he's always known. That's why I couldn't leave you in that cell. Why I didn't let them harm you. Why I protected you even when I shouldn't have. I couldn't stop needing you near. Lucy lowered her gaze, her hands clenched in her lap. Her heart pounded wildly. She could feel the truth in his words like a current under her skin. I didn't say anything, Leo continued, his voice quieter now, pained, because I thought you'd reject me. I thought you'd only see the alpha who locked you up, who was once your mother's enemy, and I wouldn't have blamed you." The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was fragile, suspended in the air like a breath not yet released. Then Lucy rose to her feet. She stepped forward, one quiet movement at a time, until she stood just inches from him. Her eyes shimmered with unspoken emotion, raw and unguarded. "I hated you once," she whispered, "but now I don't even know how to describe what I feel. When you were bitten, when I thought I'd lose you," her voice faltered, throat tightening. "It broke something in me. I didn't want to feel anything, not for you, but I do." Leo didn't move. His breath caught as her hand reached for his. Their fingers touched, and in that moment, a warmth pulsed through them. A bond unseen but undeniable flared to life. It wasn't a dramatic flare or jolt. It was steady, deep, a tether between souls that had already known suffering and yet still chose each other. No more running, no more walls of duty or fear, no more hiding behind bloodlines or ancient grudges. Leo cupped her face gently, reverently, as if she were both salvation and fire. Her skin was soft against his calloused palms. He leaned in, searching her eyes one final time, and then he kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't savage. It was full of everything unspoken, the pain, the longing, the truth of who they were becoming. He lifted her off the floor, cradling her with reverence, and carried her to the bed. The firelight bathed them in flickering gold as he laid her gently against the furs. He hovered for a moment, searching her face for any sign of fear or hesitation. There was none. He shed his shirt, revealing the broad lines of his chest, the scars of a warrior, the strength of an alpha. She reached up and traced a scar that crossed his ribs, a silent acknowledgement of all the battles they'd both endured. He leaned down, framing her body with his, and kissed her again. This time the kiss deepened. That night, they were not enemies, not alpha and prisoner, not werewolf and vampire. They were Leo and Lucy, two souls bound by fate, by grief, by fire. And together, they would burn the world to find justice. Chapter 23. The Fall of Klaus. The skies above Broken Fang Ridge churned with a storm's fury, as if the heavens themselves were bearing witness to the reckoning that had long been destined. The blood moon had long vanished from the sky, but its shadow still haunted the land, its memory lingering like the scent of smoke after a fire. Darkness clung to the battlefield, thick with tension and rage. This was no mere skirmish. This was the final confrontation, a saga of betrayal and vengeance written in fang, claw, and blood. From the western ridgeline they came, General Klaus, clad in dark armor that gleamed with blood and oil, and the Legion of Castle Vanth behind him. His armor bore the weight of centuries, its metal etched with the symbols of battles won through treachery. His crimson eyes burned with the madness of one who had tasted too much power and corrupted every ounce of it. His soldiers marched in perfect formation, vampires bred for destruction, their veins pulsing with Narzek's vile magic, their fangs bared, soulless and savage. Opposite them, the warriors of Ashclaw stood like stone. Alpha Leo led them, tall, fierce, and unwavering. His presence radiated power, his aura silencing doubt. His armor was scarred but polished, wolf motifs engraved along his pauldrons, each a symbol of a life lost and remembered. Beside him stood Lucy, the vampire princess now bound to the pack by love and fire. She wore black leather armor molded to her form, her crimson eyes glowing with vengeance. The twin blades strapped to her back shimmered in the dim light, thirsty for the blood of betrayal. Behind them, rows upon rows of werewolf warriors stood ready. Young and old, battle-worn and eager, they had trained for this moment, sharpened by grief and united under one cause. Beta Harlan towered in his wolf form, eyes locked forward, muscles coiled with anticipation. Even Alpha Magnus stood nearby, his reluctant heart now fierce with purpose, his grief for Luna Brenda carved deep into his scowl. There were no war cries, no roars of intimidation, only silence, the kind of silence that arrives before a storm tears the sky open. Then, without a signal, it began. Claws scraped against earth, fangs flashed, and the field erupted into chaos. The clash was deafening, a maelstrom of violence. Vampires collided with wolves in a frenzy of steel, fang, and sorcery. Blood painted the soil. Screams tore through the air, both beastly and human. The sky grew darker still, as if mourning the lives being lost in the madness. Leo shifted mid-stride, his massive brown-gray wolf form exploding into motion. He tore through enemy lines with unrelenting rage, his claws rending armor like paper, his fangs snapping bones. Every movement was precise, lethal. His heart pounded with the fury of 1,000 wrongs. Lucy was beside him, a blur of shadow and grace. She moved like smoke and steel, silent, deadly. Her blades carved arcs of death through Klaus's soldiers. Every strike carried the grief of a daughter, the fury of a warrior, the resolve of a mate. She danced through the bloodbath, her crimson eyes never blinking, her mind set on only one target. Hours seemed to pass in minutes, dozens fell, then hundreds, and finally, they saw him, Klaus, standing tall amidst the chaos, blood coating his claws, his gaze wild and furious. He looked upon the battlefield with disbelief and rage. His army, his great eternal army, was crumbling. He turned to flee, the coward's instinct finally overtaking his pride. But it was already too late. Leo roared, a thunderous growl that split the battlefield, and launched forward. He leapt with all the power of an alpha driven by justice and love. His massive wolf form crashed into Klaus, hurling the vampire general into a thick pine tree with such force that the bark exploded and bones cracked like dry twigs. Klaus hit the ground hard, dazed, blood pouring from his mouth. Leo landed atop him, crushing his chest with his weight. His fangs snapped inches from Klaus's throat, his claws gouging into the traitor's shoulders. Klaus writhed and shrieked, striking out with supernatural strength, but Leo's rage was impenetrable. His eyes burned gold with the fury of his dead mother and every fallen brother and sister. And then Lucy arrived. She soared through the air like a shadow of death, landing beside them with unholy grace, her gaze locked onto Klaus's bloodied form. She didn't hesitate. There was no mercy. With one clean, brutal motion, she drove her claws into his neck. Her strength, powered by the sacred bond of her lineage and her love for her mother and mate, tore through muscle and bone. Klaus's head came free with a sickening rip as she stabbed his heart with a very sharp oak blade laced with vial meant to kill vampires in agony. Silence fell. Every battle cry stopped, every sword lowered, every beast halted. Lucy rose slowly, her breaths ragged. Blood streaked her face and armor, her hand clutching Klaus's severed head, his lifeless eyes still open in disbelief. She lifted it high above her head, her form bathed in the soft light breaking through the storm. A roar followed. Leo, now in his human form, stood tall atop Klaus's body. Blood streaked his bare chest, and his eyes gleamed with triumph. He threw his head back and howled, a long, soul-deep call that echoed across the ridge. It was not just the cry of a victory. It was the sound of an era ending. One by one, the warriors of Ashclaw dropped to their knees, heads bowed. Wolves and vampires alike, a silent oath, a tribute to their alpha, to their future Luna, to the truth, finally revealed. Even Magnus, hardened by loss, stood tall and nodded in solemn respect. This was more than a battle won. It was the breaking of chains. It was the fall of a monster, and the beginning of a future born not from bloodlines, but from bonds forged in fire. Chapter 24. Crown of Blood and Moonlight. The fires of war had burned out. The echoes of howls and screams, of blades clashing and bodies falling, were now memories carried on the wind that swept across broken Fang Ridge. Once a graveyard of rage and vengeance, the land had been cleared, cleansed and consecrated. Ash and blood had been buried beneath sacred soil. The cursed Narzek had been destroyed, its foul remnants banished into the void. And in its place stood a towering monument, a stone colossus, carved by both vampire and werewolf hands. On its smooth surface, etched in ancient script and sacred runes, were the names of the fallen, warriors of both species who had perished not for domination, but for the hope of peace. The age of slaughter was over. At the heart of Ashclaw Fortress, where once cold halls had echoed with suspicion and resentment, something extraordinary now stirred. Unity? The great hall had been transformed. Once stark stone and shadow, it now gleamed with golden torchlight and silken banners. Black and crimson, the colors of Ashclaw and Vanth, draped the high archways. The scent of pine and sage floated through the air, sacred herbs meant to bind this new alliance in spirit and ritual. Werewolves and vampires stood side by side, their armor polished, their weapons sheathed, no snarls, no fear, just solemn awe. They filled the hall shoulder to shoulder, forming a sea of warriors who had once fought one another but now stood in truce. At the center of it all stood Alpha Leo. No longer just the leader of Ashclaw, he stood as a symbol of a new world. He wore ceremonial armor forged from moonsteel and obsidian ash, the metal polished to a mirror sheen. Wolf engravings coiled down his breastplate, their eyes set with sapphire stones. A heavy cloak of midnight fur hung from his shoulders. His presence, always commanding, now radiated something greater, majesty. At his side stood Lucy. She was breathtaking. Gone was the dark leather of war. Tonight she wore a flowing gown of midnight velvet that shimmered like the night sky. Silver thorns curled along the hem and bodice, embroidered with crimson rubies that caught the firelight like drops of blood. Her hair, once wild, was now woven into the crown braids of Vantha royalty. Around her neck hung her mother's pendant, a tear-shaped ruby cradled in silver, pulsing faintly with enchantment. It was Queen Celine's final gift, a reminder of legacy, sacrifice, and strength. Her heirloom. The crowd fell into silence as the fortress horns rang out, low, deep, ancient. The sound trembled through the stone, calling every soul present to bear witness. From the dais, Alpha Magnus stepped forward. His voice was gravel and thunder, a testament to age, grief, and newfound hope. He wore no crown, only simple ceremonial garb. Yet he carried the weight of generations. Today, he declared, we do not crown a king of wolves, nor a queen of blood. Today we crown peace. We crown unity. We crown a future where fangs and claws will no longer be used to destroy, but to defend. We do not forget our dead. We honor them by ensuring there are no more names added to their number. He turned toward Leo and Lucy. By right of strength, by will of fate, and by blood shed in honor, we crown you Alpha King Leo of the unified clans, and Luna Queen Lucy of Ashclaw and Vantha. The hall exploded. Roars thundered. Howls rose to the vaulted ceilings. The vampires hissed and shouted in a chorus of celebration, their voices harmonizing with the werewolves for the first time in history. Fangs bared, not in challenge but in triumph. Hearts pounded with a strange and unfamiliar feeling, hope. In the front row, Vasily stood with tears in his eyes, clapping his hands over his chest. Harlan and Magnus nodded in pride. Even the children, once sheltered in the deepest chambers, were now brought forward to see what their parents had died for. Leo turned to Lucy, taking her hand gently, pressing it to his chest where his heart beat strong and steady. I once thought you were my enemy, he said softly, the sound meant only for her ears. Now, I know you're my heart, my anchor, my truth. She smiled, blinking back tears, her voice trembling with joy. And I once vowed never to love your kind, but now I can't imagine a world without you in it. You've given me more than a partner. You've given me a home and a family. The twin crowns were brought forward by a pair of acolytes, one forged of blackened silver, etched with the runes of werewolf alpha kings, the other of crimson steel, forged from the melted weapons of vampire warriors, molded into delicate, deadly points, symbols of the old world reshaped into a promise of a new one. The moment the crowns were placed upon their heads, a hush fell again. Then, as if summoned by fate itself, a single beam of moonlight broke through the high window above the dais. It struck them, Leo and Lucy, bathing them in silver and white, casting a glow so pure and serene, even the most hardened warrior felt their heart tremble. The moon, the eternal witness of werewolf lore. The blood, the sacred oath of vampire lineage, both now crowned in harmony. And so it was that the war ended, not with screams, but with vows, not with fire, but with moonlight. Together they stood, the Alpha King and Luna Queen. And as their people roared once more, as the bells rang and the stars blinked their quiet blessing above the ridge where it all began, a new age was born, the age of unity, the reign of peace, the end. If you enjoyed this audiobook, subscribe to my channel for more interesting audiobooks like this. Save the audiobook playlist for more upcoming audiobooks. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Check out new audiobooks in my channel. Do you think Alpha Magnus has completely let go of the hatred towards vampires? Comment your answers in the comments section. Thanks for listening.